Okay, I think we're live. Good morning, everyone. Today is Saturday, March 11th, and we have another session of the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. Today, we're going to give updates on our upcoming Korea event, as well as continuing our reading, returning back to our reading of Black Reconstruction. But before we do all of that, I wanted to hand it over to Dr. Montero, who's going to talk about the world situation.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm not going to talk about the world situation. I just want to talk about, I guess it's the world situation, uh, the reestablishment of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Uh, and this is a huge thing because it was brokered by the Chinese. Uh, there's so many implications to this. I was reading articles in the New York Times and the Financial Times, and believe me, if you want to be confused, read those newspapers. Uh, on the one side, they write like petulant children, uh, trying to convince their readers, well, this is not such a big deal. Don't fear it. Uh, that China's making certain moves, but all of this is only temporary. Uh, this is huge. First of all, I think what we're witnessing is an end to the concept of the Middle East, which was a way of defining uh, that geography of West Asia, uh, and one could even say Northeast Africa, uh, to define it in a pro-colonialist way. That whole definition arose out of British colonialism. Uh, the two countries are part of Asia, and the deal was brokered by an Asian country, China. And so, to use Du Bois's concept, it looks like uh, a further step towards Pan Asia. And if Saudi Arabia and Iran could take steps towards a situation of what we could call peaceful coexistence, it shouldn't be that difficult for China and India to make similar steps. But the implications of this are huge. Um, Saudi Arabia has stated that it wishes to become a part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is an organization of China, Russia, and a number of Central Asian states. Uh, it is a developing, it's about uh, maybe 25 years old, maybe a little bit more. Uh, and it was formed in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Uh, its principal objective in the beginning was anti-terrorism, that is, to prevent the rise of Al Qaeda type organizations, which, by the way, uh, for the most part, are linked to the United States and U.S. military objectives, but to protect Russia and other states in Central Asia, including China, from terrorism. And now Saudi Arabia has said it wants to be a part of that. Uh, Iran is already a part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Uh, it also looks like Saudi Arabia will petition to become a part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which Iran is already a part of. Uh, Saudi Arabia is ditching the petrodollar and increasingly substituting the uh, renminbi or yuan, which is the Chinese currency. In other words, um, Saudi Arabia will trade its oil with China in the yuan, the petro yuan, part of what has given the US all of this power, misused as it were, in world economic relations, and its inordinate ability to impose sanctions, financial and otherwise, upon nations, is based upon the fact that Saudi Arabia agreed about in 1971 that it would only trade its oil in dollars or petrodollars. So every country that imports oil, especially from Saudi Arabia, would have to have a reserve of dollars in its central bank to pay for oil from the Gulf states and especially Saudi Arabia. That is coming to an end. This is a blow to the to dollar hegemony, as we call it. And one could readily see a new global financial architecture, which is not controlled by the US and the dollar, and takes away from the US this inordinate power to destroy economies through sanctions and threats of sanctions, as they did with India at the onset of the war in Ukraine, and saying to India, if you import Russian oil, we're thinking of imposing sanctions upon you. Well, increasingly, the weapon of US sanctions is going to be taken away from it. The other thing is the reinstatement of international law as the law between nations, and not this US thing of a rules-based system. And nobody knows what the rules are except the United States. This is huge. I would just say we should keep our eyes on it. It's something that we have spoken about, a lot of times in free school. But the world that we live in is changing. The center of power is moving away from the United States and its European allies, which I think won't be its allies for too much longer, because they're going to see the handwriting on the wall. And nations, especially Germany, but others in Central Europe and West Europe, just for their own economic interests, will have to comply with this new world that is coming into being. Just about Mohammed bin Salman, the, as they say, de facto leader of government in Saudi Arabia. I don't know that there has been such a leader, so independent-minded as this guy is. He is unique, which means that there is a whole group of political strategists and thinkers in Saudi Arabia that have assessed the world, Saudi Arabia's place in it, and what the future will look like for the world itself and for them in particular. So I just wanted to bring that up. The other thing is closer to home, and that is the collapse of this bank in California called the Silicon Valley Bank, which we could say the high-tech bank, the bank of social media and high-tech entrepreneurship. The first question that you have to ask is it a bank? And really, what is a bank? Because it seemed to look more like a hedge fund, parading or imitating or saying it's a bank. But nonetheless, the only bank of a similar magnitude to have collapsed was the Bank of Washington in 2008. Now, just to get some things clear, none of us, least of all me, understands what is going on in this labyrinth called the financial system or the banking system. We just don't know. Everything occurs in the dark. 96% of the deposits in this bank were over the $250,000 that is insured by the federal government. So in other words, most of the investors in this bank will not, what they had invested will not be insured, because 96% of them were way beyond the $250,000 thing. So it's not a bank unless you say it is a bank for those who invest in it, and it manages their investments like a hedge fund would manage investment. And we have to keep our eye on it for this reason, because it raises the question, does the federal government bail out these investors while people in the state of Washington and other states are having their food subsidies cut, while people in West Palestine still don't know what their futures are, whether they'll be able to live, while a city like Philadelphia is the poorest of the big cities in the country, with an open-air drug market that far exceeds anything else in the country, probably in the world. And we're going to bail out these reckless billionaires who are not unlike the reckless and corrupt billionaires that run the Ukrainian state. This is so important, and we have to keep our eyes on it. Because clearly, the question of this bank will be an issue in the 2024 presidential election. If Trump runs on something that looks vaguely like a working class protest, if he is, as he says, your retribution against the elites, he will have to run against these practices that impoverish the working people and the lower middle class and the poor. But at the end of the day, even with these failing banks, the big investors come out better than when the thing started. And then, of course, when all of this is tied up to the war in Ukraine, it's just, as you can see, a very interconnected world. And I don't want to, I can't hold myself back. It is so disturbing to me that we have a peace march next Saturday whose major purpose is not peace. Peace might be part of their objectives, but the major objective is to diminish the peace march that occurred a month ago. When did we have such a luxury of political brinksmanship by groups that claim to be a coalition of micro, mini organizations that very few people have ever heard of, but who find it difficult in their demands to link the repression at home, the impoverishment of the working class and of the middle classes, to war and economic exploitation. They don't do it. And I'll just stop. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Emily.
Yeah, so there's a pause because I was taking notes. Yeah, what you just said about, because when I started hearing you talk about like the Saudi Arabia and Iran brokered by China, that change, like there's, I think we've said it before in free school, but just the magnitude of how the world is changing. Like there's a new world order clearly emerging, and it's pretty concrete. But then, especially when you started talking about the Silicon Valley Bank and how these, like you were just describing how there will be billionaires who will be bailed out. And then like I am going to just bring up Biden's budget proposal in the sense that people keep saying, "Oh, it's not, it's a dead budget." Like he's coming to Philadelphia, working class Northeast Philly at some like union hall to propose a dead budget. Like just that, setting that scene, but then you have just this past month, like a movement of people, almost like quote unquote unlikely forces together, all like coming together because they're so angry at the CIA, the consensus of the intelligence, military complex, politicians. And just hearing you talk about all of this, it made me actually, yeah, really angry about the March. Because it is essentially going, you have to say that it is basically going against this coalition of the discontented. And it's going against like any sense of a movement of people in America who are basically saying like, I want to shake off, I'm trying to shake off the chains of a government that insists on governing me when it cannot govern. And I think that is important. Like, I actually think that's very important for people, anyone trying to get a sense of like, oh, what's going on with this March? Like, you have to see it in the sense that why are you so insistent on pushing your own agenda rather than being connected to the February March? Because at the end of the day, this is all for the people. It's all for a people, like the people of East Palestine, like you were saying. And then there's like people keep talking about how there are more train wrecks, and there's so many train wrecks the news can't even keep up with how many train wrecks there are. And yeah, I just really appreciated you saying like connecting all this together, because I think it is connected. And to me, I keep saying it, but I just think it's like I keep saying that the February March, it's almost like the wildest dreams to see, like especially white people, for example, white people who are like, I'm done with the status quo, like down with the CIA. When have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
And then for this March to claim like they're not just saying like, oh, we're marching for peace in March. They're actually, what they're saying is we're going, like we're purposely trying, like you said, we're purposely trying to go against the February March. That doesn't make sense to me. So I just wanted to add that. Well, if no one has any other comments, we can go to updates on Korea, but I guess I'll read some responses to that opening doc. Daryl Waistline Mitchell says, excellent summation of dollar hegemony based on the petrodollar. Game over, original dollar hegemony article 2002, and then he links.
Could you say that last part again?
He says, game over, original dollar hegemony article from 2002, and then he links an article about the dollar hegemony. And then a DJ Elf has some comments. I'm going to try to sum them up. He says, I respect your passion for fighting war and appreciate you. But no talk, dissent is okay. No talk to the workers at the People's Party. I think it's him going against the People's Party, just saying that he from his experience, they monopolize the resources and access. And then just some other people are tuning in, just saying good morning, like Don DeBar, Todd Doherty, some others.
I actually had one thing to say about the restoration of diplomatic relations between Riyadh and Tehran. I actually also read some of these New York Times like articles, and then I had a friend send me some articles as well from China in Chinese, which she translated for me, and she sent them over. Um, and I was thinking that this might actually be the beginning of something. This might be the beginning of other Middle Eastern nations also looking towards China to broker peace between them. You know, something. You know, uh, these tensions which have been built up over years because of US and Western interference, they might actually start to, the nations might actually start to say, okay, no, we're not looking to the West anymore, we're not falling for them, we're going to look towards the East, we're going to look at China to actually strengthen our bonds. And I have a feeling that, you know, two things are going to happen, that China is going to keep doing this. They're going to keep trying to broker peace between these nations, um, maintaining that, you know, they do not have geopolitical and economic interests in the nation, which is why they're doing it. And at the same time, the US and the West are going to insist that that is the reason why China is doing it. And you know, Purba and I were talking this morning, and she also said that, you know, this is where it begins. This is where all the human rights violations in Saudi Arabia and Iran, those kinds of allegations start to pop up as well. Um, yeah, so I think we are going to see uh, China fighting the US, and we are actually going to see the US for once um, being on the back foot in this scenario.
I think even in our conversation and talking about the February March and also the world situation, something that was clarified to me is how the reason why the March in February was significant is that it represents a new phenomenon in America with the changing world situation. Because I think an argument that people make with the March is that they're the originals and they're the ones that should be championing like a cause for the people. And I think, you know, Doc, you were clear in terms of actually our disagreements with that. But I think the important thing is that to recognize the February March as a new phenomenon of people in America being transformed because of the world situation and because of America's war policies abroad. And it's this new phenomenon that I think the free school is also trying to understand. Like who are these people who are starting, who may not be the most perfect, such as someone like Trump, but there's a shift in their consciousness because of what's changing in the world. And I don't think that that's something that the March in March fully captures or understands. You know, the phenomenon of Trump, the phenomenon of white people in this country, and the phenomenon of even like people in the military in the past who, because of their closeness to the state, are recognizing actually that there's a contradiction. And I think that's significant. And the other piece is with the brokering of like relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Like I think it is significant because it's speaking to a new world order, a new way in which politics is done, where it's not these large powers that are, you know, dictating what relations between countries are, but actually like what diplomacy means, where, you know, there is China in brokering or negotiate, or I guess in the mix, but it's actually a difference from the old world order in which the US has dictated relations between nations. And I think that's what's significant in seeing this emergence or flourishing that's allowed to happen. Like what happens when nations are able to talk to one another, unbridled by overall U.S. or Western pressures.
Well, just to build on that, this thing about the changing world order, I think one thing that the Black Reconstruction Symposium, but also what we are talking about, the Korea event, I think one of the central themes there is the American people joining world humanity in their struggle towards, higher forms of democracy, higher freedom, and actually the truth. And just hearing about this peace deal that was brokered by China between Saudi Arabia and Iran after 7 years of no diplomatic relations, it really makes it clarifies how urgent it is that the current ruling class is defeated, because they take the American people away from, or like isolated from these huge changes taking place in the world, because the world is moving forward and America can't get left behind just because uh, some people have decided that they are the ones who arbitrate how a peace movement in America will look like, but also in general, what, yeah. Um,
Yeah, I feel bad because everything I want to say is about things that I'm thinking about for my presentation for the upcoming Korea event. But it is really this thing of like you pointed out, you reminded me of what Jahan said, Doc, but how Jahan was like, isn't it significant that the February March is at the Lincoln Memorial? Like they deliberately chose, and even if people are not totally conscious of it, but I do think people are. Like that's a place beyond just like Lincoln. I don't even know how many people go to the Lincoln Memorial like just for Lincoln, but it's the place of the civil rights movement, the March on Washington. And in this time of why is it that in this time of crisis, people are searching for this lasting legacy of King? Like, what about that? And I think people are searching for, because it's kind of what Purba said, like what you said reminded me of this, because like what you just said about how like it's clear people can feel there's a new era, like the old era of old relations, like whether you want to call it Cold War or American hegemony or what, like it's just not, it's not sustainable. It's, the world is already changing, and it's not, I think people in America, there's this feeling of it's so, we're not okay with this anymore to be left behind. Like, and now what you see is you see American people who showing up at the Lincoln Memorial. They're looking for something. They're looking for the path forward. How can we be free? Like, how do we create something new to free ourselves of a government that no longer represents us or our interests? And I think that's the thing people feel like. People, like, we've given the statistic about how the American people are more anti-war today than they even were in the 60s. And I think there is this feeling of the American people being like, I don't want to be involved in other people's business anymore. Can we focus on our business first? Like, I don't want to put my energy in putting like down a world that's literally rising together. Like, can we focus on our own business first? And I just think that's really deep about the Lincoln Memorial. Like, people, I do think people are coming back to King, because that's where you have to go if you're thinking of how do we move forward? Like, how do we become free? You have to go back to King and that movement that qualitatively changed the American people. But also, like, there's something in King's vision that still stands to this day. It's what you said, Doc, where you were like, it's like this thing of, like, how is it that the March is not connecting what's happening abroad to what's happening at home? Like, that's the fundamental connection. And oh, there's something else I was gonna say. Yeah, oh yeah, because you also like also the March is not going to the Lincoln Memorial. They're only at the White House. Like that's, and I think that's significant. That the February March, it was like, let us return to that place where King spoke. Yeah, you don't have that. Like, you don't have that with the March. And I think that's something they should reflect on, honestly.
Well, I was gonna say something that I just thought about, And it builds on how we've been talking about the anti-war rally for a couple months now, and also the rally, the counter rally that's happening in March. I think we keep returning to this idea also because there's a political depth to what's happening, but there's also an undeniable creativity that comes back to this idea of the emergence of a new American people. And something I'm really thinking about is why it's emerging among like this sociological category of people. You know, these like ordinary workers or these working people, a lot of whom are white. Because it's not enough to say that there's just plain discontent. I think that really the way that we're analyzing the situation, there's like color and there's creativity in the way a people is moving or like a people is developing. And I also say this because it's so discordant with how much it feels like other sociological sections of American people like aren't moving. You know, if anything, they're becoming more ossified or like, yeah, they're not moving at all. And what I'm thinking is, for example, the people of the academic world or like the professional managerial class, their sense of cynicism is deepening, their conviction that America is only degrading, only getting worse is deepening. And then at the same time, like we're seeing something very fertile, which is why we keep talking about it. And I just can't completely wrap my head around it yet, but I find it so interesting. And yeah, I am curious like what everyone else thinks.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the professional managerial class concept, because to organize a march against another peace march, to say like my march is going to be the right one, it's going to have the right politics, you know, but I mean, who are you to decide? The people decide. You know what I mean? And you know, it's a dialectical relationship, but it is this kind of, yeah, it's like trying to replace the old managerial class with the new one, or there it's part of the same one, which is why it's not a genuine peace march. And I've just been thinking about this a lot because I mean, even just I started using this software called Grammarly. I just use it for editing and stuff. And I was editing some things I was writing for some academic work. And the way it was correcting my language to be more inclusive, I was like, this is just 1/10 of what people must feel. You know, working people must feel. You can't say statesmen anymore. Be more inclusive. Say politicians. But I want to say statesmen because I'm talking about Charles Sumner. They're statesmen, you know. And I would call a woman a statesman too, you know, because it means something that we've lost. Or even like like you're writing about Du Bois and the black worker and how the slave is also a worker. Don't say slave. Say enslaved person. Don't say slave owner. Say enslaver. And it's just like, you know, I mean, if the people who are changing the language, Du Bois doesn't use this language. The people who are changing the language are actually changing the essence of the words, of the sentiments. And it's just completely abandoning the search for truth for this very superficial dressing. And it kind of reminds me of this march a little bit, where it's like, oh, we're also going to talk about Palestine. We're also going to talk about Free Mumia. And it's just this policing of that urge towards truth and justice and peace. And it really is the opposite kind of thing of a movement, like Michelle was saying, which is opening, creating a new people, you know, bringing people in, like transforming them with love. And yeah, I was just so angry at this software. But think of how many in her union, as Emily talks about, the way people are being policed, you know, and people must be angry. I mean, I'm angry.
That point reminds me too of what Noah from Midwestern Marks was saying. His talk where he underscored the idea of purity fetish, because when he said that was the first time I ever heard it, but I feel like I've heard about it like just in different terminology, like sanitization or like stuff like that. And yeah, that was a perfect example, like, what you just described, of like having all of your work be trivialized down to what's accepted right now. And then in 20 more years, they're going to change those words to what's accepted then. And it's like you said, it's a matter of losing the essence of the reality of this situation. So people aren't focused on what's actually happening. They're just focused on the emotion behind how these words will make other people feel. And it's like that's not what our priority is, because people's feelings aren't being attacked. People's lives are being attacked. People's lives are literally being taken from them. And they know that. And they want us to focus on the trivialization of everything. And it is really frustrating because I'm going through the same thing as well in my papers. And I'm just like, it's just really annoying to be policed on the things that really will not matter because of semantics, when the issue was much larger than the, I guess, political correctness of it. But yeah,
Yes.
thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I mean, also it's an industry because there's a lot of money being made on people who are saying what's correct, softwares that are saying what's correct. I'm sure the hedge fund come bank that Doc was talking about has invested heavily in this kind of thing, because it's a new way of like stabilizing capitalism. I think, like, you know, racial justice rather than actually ending racism, you know, destroying the system.
I also wanted to add that what you guys are saying, and also our conversation so far, it reminds me so much of how Du Bois describes the ideological struggle, or like the ideological clash of what he believed and Booker T. Washington believed in the early 20th century. Because I've been reading his last autobiography, and the way that he describes, he called it the Tuskegee machine, and how much it had an ideological stronghold over like Black America that time. I mean, so much of what we have talked about, I think it almost gives a certain resilience and solace to know that like this has very much happened in history before, because what Du Bois talked about was how Booker T. Washington making what he felt were inconsequential concessions. For example, this idea that Black Americans shouldn't strive for the right to vote, or shouldn't strive for civil rights, or shouldn't strive for higher education, really, really would degrade like Black America over time, but also degrade the fate of America as a whole. And I think that Du Bois was really like brutally castigated for, or like just very brutally punished for taking that stand. And just like, for example, I just listened to Doc's Midwestern Marx interview, I think earlier this week. And just like Doc, the way that you talked about how you've been kicked out of institutions all your life. Yeah, it's like the same thing with Du Bois, except that Du Bois was really taking a stand against the Tuskegee machine, like at that time. And I also think that's part of why he founded The Crisis, was because it was very difficult to publish at that time anything that wasn't approved by the ideas of the Tuskegee machine. So yeah, what you guys were saying just reminded me of that. But it also is an affirmation of how I think history will absolve what it is that we're doing, the stands that we take, the way that history has absolved like the thought of Du Bois, the thought of Henry Winston, etc.
Yeah, just to add, I think part of the discussion around like the war, like the different war rallies, I think the way that I understand it is that it's almost like parallel with the crisis of the legitimacy of the ruling class. There is a crisis in the legitimacy of the left, and the legitimacy of those who have laid claim to these principles of anti-war for, like, I guess, like the past 2 decades in particular. And the question, like, and yeah, because I'm seeing in the comments there's discussion around like the organizers of the February March and all that, and yeah, like we're not privy to those conversations, but I think it kind of is. That's not really the point, though. Like, what we are interested in is, if you think of yourself as an organizer, as an activist, as a revolutionary, the real question is, are you worthy of the people? Right? And time will tell if the people in like the People's Party, Libertarian Party, if they will actually, like, if the people will actually believe in them. Like, that is up to the organizers of the February March. It's also up to the, like, these people who are organizing the Answer Coalition rally in March. Are they worthy of the people? That's the question. And what we're also responding to is these, like, what we talked about a few weeks ago, like the attacks against the February March from people like in Black Agenda Report, the Jackie Lukman article, was basically saying like, how dare you not like consult us? How dare you not do things our way? But the hysteria that was reflected in that article is the same hysteria that you see in the ruling class, because they are facing a crisis of legitimacy. And ultimately, yeah, what we're interested in is who is going to do things that are actually worthy of the people. And I think that like all these attacks against the organizers of the rally, like it just makes me angry, because I like even like the racial component of it, it's just part of it is like, one, it's very disingenuous to be like, oh, we represent Black people and like you are like, yeah, like that whole thing. But like I just feel like in this time, like when the ruling class is going for broke on this woke stuff, like I want white people to have self-respect. Like I don't want them to be just kind of this self-denigrating, self-deprecating thing where you're always bowing down to like these so-called like people of color activists who are always trying to shame white people. Like I want white people to have more self-respect, whether they're the activists or just the people who are becoming involved in politics. And yeah, I just think the fundamental question is like, are we worthy of the people? That's the question that we're interested in, the Free School. It's also the question that the organizers of the February rally should be interested in. And time will tell, like if they are not principled and if they don't actually meet the moment and meet the interests of the people who attended, I think the people will cast them aside, but that's for the people to decide. It's not for us to decide. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's just how I feel about it. But yeah, I think, yeah, the part of how I understand like the dynamics at play is like these, yeah, like the people like Anti-Coalition who have basically like, oh yeah, we're the real anti-war voice. We've been doing this for 20 years. And like, okay, that's great. You've been doing it for 20 years. Like, are the people actually interested in what you're doing? Like that's the real question. It's not like, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years. How dare you not like come to me? And yeah, I think so. That's how I feel like part of the dynamics. And yeah, like if the people who are part of the People's Party, like Nick Brana, all those people, if they aren't able actually to meet the moment, then like that's on them. Like we're not trying to be like, oh, like we totally believe in the organizers of the rally, but we believe that as Alice was saying, this is a reflection of deeper changes in the consciousness of the American people, and that includes white people. And this is something that we think is a positive development. And whether or not the organizers of the rally are up to it, that's on them. And so yeah.
Yeah, and I totally agree with Emily in the fact of returning to King, like the core, because it's like, what is the movement as defined by the history of the people in America that actually transformed America and the world? And like, Du Bois and King are central to this whole thing. And I just think that we're like being able to see how like the ruling class, like the world that the ruling class wants, and that the world that like this, like that the group of people who push against like the freedom or push against democracy, like I don't know how to, easily name finance, capital, or anything, but like the warmongers, people who stand for war, how much that world is not to be trusted at all and how it's falling apart. But also like the choices that like this moment is presenting, because another term in my mind is that international, or like what is it, something democracy,
International democracy.
Yeah, international democracy concept that we were talking about. I don't know if that was from Black Reconstruction, and how like Alice was saying about the way that countries can relate to one another can fundamentally change if the principles of relationships are based upon peace and those kind of things, rather than war, which is what this country and finance capital want to base its principles off of. And it's interesting that, like, well, what actually works and what doesn't. I think that's part of the process that we're also seeing. More than just, well, like, more than just of what you're saying, Jeremiah, like, oh, we'll see who will, like, time will decide. Well, I think time has decided a lot of things, you know, because we do know that Martin Luther King is someone to go back to. We do know how to understand the civil rights movement and the peace movement because we've studied it in the free school. And like, I think, again, if you are not trying to understand the civil rights movement, you're not trying to understand Reconstruction in America in the way that Du Bois is understanding, centralizing the Black worker, and because of that, centralizing peace, because they're fighting for because the story of Reconstruction in America is the story of the Black worker being able to actualize democracy or become free as a human being to actualize democracy, which fundamentally is like the basis in which the country would be able to move at all. I think that if one is to, or like people are ignoring that fact, ignores the anchor that history will move. And so that's like, we do have tools in the toolkit. It's if we are able to use them or not. And again, why are we not able to use them? Okay, people are anti-communist. Okay, people want to become either more petty-minded and think that things are insignificant, even if they are actually the significant things. Meaning, like, you know, kind of put Martin Luther King down or put Du Bois down and say like they're, you know, not as important when actually they are the central things. And I think it's our attention to these kind of details that makes what we're seeing, or what also DACA is being able to bring to our attention again, more clear. Because we are in a moment of a lot of choices, and we can only make these choices based off of political and ideological preparation. How do you also politically and ideologically prepare yourself in America and also in this time? Well, you return to Du Bois and you return to King. But yeah, just to add to the conversation, I just think that things are working. Like the Silicon Valley, well, if that bank fails, what other banks will fail?
Right.
If the trains fail, like what other systems will fail? And it's up to this. It's like, it's a similar question of Reconstruction. Like, what is this country made of, and what do we want this country to be? And I think that's why King is so alive, because there is a dream. You know, there is something that, there is different calls, like in the civil rights movement, well, you have to get the people to be able to vote. You have to have Black people to vote. Well, I think in this moment, there are similar things that people need, which is one, not to be controlled ideologically, like within the mind, like in the universities, in the social media. And we have to be against war as a country and as a group of people. And you know, it's just, it gets to, why is Trump relevant? Why is Trump able to speak to the people that he does speak to? But also, why is he also important to understand, not in a dogmatic or sort of like, you know, tunnel visioned way, but like Trump is a kind of moment to go towards what? To become a country that is also different. You know, move away from war and all these other things. I just think that there's these kinds of questions that you can think about because of our study and our understanding of King and the movement and what was actually important for democracy to become real. for this country and thus in the world, like basic principles and things like that. But
I wanted to talk a little bit more about what I've been researching about this bank because so I'm in technology, so I see kind of what's some stuff going on behind the scenes, and then I worry a lot about it because this is my future. And there's the way they talk about it on Twitter, which are like the mechanics, which I think have some truth to it, and then there are the underlying implications. And so the way they kind of like talk about it is that like a bunch of money was flowing into this bank from tech investors because interest rates were low, money was free. And this bank primarily makes its money by investing in other tech companies. So it's like the bank was getting money from tech companies and it was putting it back into these other tech companies. And so this like money flow was primarily pumped from cheap borrowing rates, and then the Fed increases interest rates, and now the flow of money has diminished, and all these companies that I guess were getting free money, they're like, "Yo, we need some money. Let's pull some out from the bank." And the bank, you know, they have all their money tied up in investing in these startups, so they start to sell some I guess financial instruments from the U.S. Treasury, which they bought when interest rates were low, and so they sell them at like a huge loss right now because the United States Treasury is giving out financial instruments at higher interest rates, and then they say everybody's taking their money out, and so they have to increasingly sell at a lower at a bigger loss to try to get some liquidity, and I guess the whole thing crashes because they just don't have money to pay people. But underlying this is that the United States economy, at least in technology, for the longest time has been really just sustained by speculative investments because people have been getting cheap money and are looking for high rate of returns. And it's really been, and the undertone they don't talk about is that, for example, there's been like hundreds of thousands of tech layoffs because there's no industry to support a bunch of people making $100,000 salaries. And even before that, I've been seeing so many contractors from overseas. Interestingly, they tried the lower wage ones are from India, and the higher wage ones are from other places. Like interestingly, we've seen some Chinese. So there's, you know, even before that, there's been a lack of viability in the United States technology sector. And even the broader implications of this is that I would say tech is probably one of the most shaky, unstable sectors of the United States economy. And so if this is happening in the technology sector, then there's plenty of other parts of the economy that are shaky as well. And so we're in some deep doo-doo, as others, as Doc likes to say. So this is definitely just the beginning of this is like the first domino, I imagine. Save your money, my friends. I'm not joking. And even underpinning this as well is, you know, the United States as the global currency of the world. They're able to print money in USD. They have all these other countries indebted, and then they have to pay their debt in United States dollars. So the United States dollar, they're able to buy things from other countries because those other countries owe them debt, money which they're printing. So if nobody wants the US dollar because you don't need it, because you can settle debt and financial transactions in the yuan, then we're really, really in bad shape in the short term, because this will free humanity, and then we'll have an economy based off of real goods and services, and, you know, no one else has to be poor for us to have a decent standard of living.
That's interesting. The quote in my mind that came up was like the moral arc of
The arc of the moral universe
is long, but it bends towards justice. Thank you.
I was just.
But it's because it's interesting that to think about like how we have positioned ourselves in like this moment, and we've only done so because of like our constant meetings and studying and things like that. But then also like, yeah, this question about joining humanity. Yeah, Doc was telling me earlier, like about like the struggle being arduous.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I think we've also read on a number of times, like whether it be like in the Long March in China or like the nonviolence and like studying nonviolence in the South, or even now with Reconstruction, like this, or even Russia, like these long histories that other countries have gone to like this like conflicting, struggling, like these emerging peoples, you know, fighting for the chance to live, for their children to live. And like, I think that this constitution or this country could really only mean what it says, like if we go through with it and not kind of fall back, or you know, but I can only say it like that, even though I know it's not that simple, because you know, other things can happen that I just don't know about, like
Right.
you know,
Mhm.
either emerging things that work against the people,
Yep.
or you just don't really know. But I think part of this like uncertainty, or you know, because we talked about like the uncertainty principle, or like, you know, not even just as like a thing that like is an idea, but like the actual fact of like history, like, and this is in Du Bois, this is this almost the central thing of like all like this chess pieces and peoples, like human beings, like to understand human beings, you have to like, you study it in Du Bois, you study it in Baldwin, you see it actualized in King. Like I think the complexity is part of its beauty, but the fact of being able to struggle towards it and at least try, is something that is very important. And I have just like a deep feeling towards that, where like I understand a certain fact that, you know, maybe we can't do it, or like maybe there's something that will just be in the way, and then we'll fall into a dark hole, and like nothing will work out, and it'll just be for nothing, you know. Or I can think the other way, which is the other extreme, like, oh, okay, we try and we struggle and it'll be beautiful and everything will be golden sun rays and everything. You know me, I'm a very positive person, I don't think negative. But I think it's sort of the thing when we study Reconstruction, and when we see events unfold, that there's the point of being able to choose the right side of history and stay on principle. And I think that's also why we study history, and that's why we at least try for the, you know, for the children, or like for like.
No question.
So,
could I just say something, if you don't mind? You know, I agree so much with this conversation, you know, which means that, you know, one of my great pastimes is going on YouTube and looking at past free schools. And I know I have to go back and look at this because there's so many things that have been said that I have to look at again to totally absorb them. But you know what? You know, this idea of a left that's worthy of the people at this time in history. And that is why the concepts left and right have lost their meaning. Because once the left, as it defines itself, has abandoned working people in substance, I'm not just talking about in words, but in substance, there's been an abandonment of the working class and an attack upon the working class. And that is what settler colonialism, 1619 project, and so much else is about. And hence, by giving up on the people, they've given up on the struggle for a new democracy. And hence, even though for political reasons they can't openly say it these days, they are deeply opposed to Martin Luther King. Deeply opposed to Martin Luther King. And I wish to make that argument. You know, when you hear people talk about the real king or the radical king as opposed to the liberal assimilationist king, that is an attack upon King. There is no less than radical king, and I've argued this in interviews and other things, etc. But what king, and here's what they oppose, while saying they fight for peace, when it comes to their own country's democratic emergence, they will not take a position for a democratic way to achieving a new democracy. You know, see, they see King really, and I have to tell you this because going back to the days that, you know what the arguments were, and you know people now in this time who were making those arguments back then, they felt that the nonviolent path to social change was the enterprise of cowards, and that King himself was less than courageous. But what King was saying in essence, or asking of the American people, can we discover a democratic means to achieving a new democracy and a new people? And this is, this is what the Free School has been saying. I know Magna and Serafina and myself, we go back to the year of Du Bois. We had forum after forum. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. I'm one of these people, I know a lot of the activists, and I want to know why you weren't there. I want to know, what are you boycotting?
Yeah.
Let's be transparent. What do you uphold and what do you boycott? I think we have, and here I agree with Serafina, we have before us an opportunity of a lifetime to really discover and implement, along with the broad mass of people, a democratic path to a new democracy. And by a new democracy in the United States, indeed, we're talking about all of the rights that all people should have, all of the rights, under the law, under the Constitution, under the Civil Rights Act. But that is not the essence of the struggle for democracy. It is a much larger, more transformative, definitely more transformative, because the legal struggle is not necessarily a transformative struggle. And of course, the liberal wishes to keep it in that framework. But what we are talking about, blessed are those who fight for peace and for the unity of the people. Once you enter upon the path of the struggle for peace, You are compelled to fight for unity.
Yeah.
You can't say you're for peace and then wage divisive struggles on any issue. I just want to end on this. I was on an interview on a podcast, and it was okay. Many people liked it a lot. I felt it could have been much better. But the man interviewing me asked, when I said I went to the march on February 19th, and he was shocked. You went to that march? I said, yes, and weren't you there? I would never go to that. And then he entered into what I still do not understand, an attack upon Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald, Tulsi Gabbard, as having moved to the right. But none of this is defined. What do you mean to the right? The American people, unlike any other period of anti-war activity, are separating themselves from the ruling class of this country. And I say, if you're for peace, get out of the way of that process. Get out of the way. You are an obstruction. You, in fact, objectively, are working on behalf of the war makers while proclaiming yourself for peace. To me, there is no way to parse this, no two ways about it. And of course, this idea, and here, it's embedded in all of this talk. To be left is to be sectarian. To be left means to be a vanguardist. By that I mean a person or group that believes that I am left, therefore I must be in the leadership of everything. No. The responsible and honest left is always looking for ways to build coalition, united front, unity of the people, wherever they may be in their ideological development. And you do not blame the people. You do not blame the people. You look at Martin Luther King, went to jail more than anybody in the civil rights movement. In the Deep South, he never blamed the people. And so, I just, we're in that critical time. Next week, I think it will be, Xi Jinping will visit Moscow. This will be another blow to the neocons that run this government. I think they're in the deepest crisis since the Civil War, maybe deeper than that in some sense. But this system cannot manage but so many shocks to its rule. I agree with Eddie. I'm so happy you explained this more for me. These kind of institutions that are really not a front for finance capital and reckless economic behavior, which has really, and this is a fact, destroyed industry and the manufacturing base of this country. Biden can say what he wants, go to any union hall he wants to go to. But he is a part of a cabal, a ruling elite that deindustrialized this country. Cheap money was not for the sake of investing in schools, in healthcare, in housing, in ordinary people. It was given to, like this bank and others, for the sake of deindustrializing, and the outcome has been the impoverishment of the American people. And what if people want to know what the free school is about? We are about a new democracy, a people's democracy, a 21st century democracy rooted in the great struggles of the past. If you want to know how we propose getting to it, we, like Martin Luther King, support democratic means to achieve new democracy. We do not put ourselves above the people. We want to hear the people, to be part of the people, to contribute, not to tell the people what they have to think and what they have to do. I think, and I could be wrong about this, but this March next week, I don't know what the numbers will be. Probably a lot of NGOs and nonprofits are behind this, which means they are linked to the elites and the Democratic Party. Of course, the Democratic Party, let's be real, will support this before they would have support February 19th, because it is too close to people who will align with Trump if he is a peace candidate. The smearing of Tulsi Gabbard, come on now. Her bona fides speak for themselves in the struggle for peace. But we have to keep it 100. This, and I'll say it to them, I'll say it to anybody. This March, next week, objectively supports the re-election of Biden or somebody like Biden. They would prefer that Trump be defeated rather than to prevent a nuclear war or the spread of war to other parts of the world. Biden has already said they are prepared to go to war with China. They are sending weapons to Taiwan. They are attempting to cut off the democratic path to new democracy. To do so, they have to attack the people. Is that the left? No, it is not the left. It is fake. So I think the crisis, I agree with Eddie about this, the crisis has only deepened in the last few weeks. Losing in Ukraine and still talking about war with China in the face of a Russia-China alliance. And now it looks like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Saudi Arabia. What madness is this? But yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
No, I like how you said the democratic means to a path to a new democracy, because that's our slogan. We march to achieve our nation. I just really like that it's explained, because you can only get a democracy if you get there using the principles of democracy.
I think you're right. I think you're right about that, especially in this time. The path to democracy has to itself be democratic, but it must at all cost stand for peace.
Exactly.
And unity of the people. Do we have interests different than the people? Are we in conflict with our own people? Do we want to fight it like that? Or do we want to continually point to who the enemy of all of us is? That's the way, I think the calculus is so clear. I mean, you often ask, well, what is the problem? You just want to be a contrarian? Are there ideological questions that and ideological investments that you choose not to be transparent about? I think that's part of the problem, by the way. It's not just what you say. I want to know the ideological foundations that are at the base of what you're saying, and such. I don't see how this left, whatever's left of it, can survive this splitting tactics or these splitting tactics. I just don't.
Tony, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to say this point before y'all left the topic, because you and Serafina were reminding me of this idea that European and American nations have done, like in thinking back to the Opium Wars in China and how they divided China and Hong Kong, and just like that domestic like feud against a people and its own people, and what's going on now. And I'm just like drawing the parallels to like the present day, and like and when you speak about Biden and him invoking like the possibility of war with China, it literally like it makes my heart rate like go up. Like it makes me so anxious, like everyone as a people, and it really is scary. And people
High blood
see
pressure
that
medication, Sade.
it doesn't help that I'm an
I
asthmatic.
hate to bring it up, but yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I say that to say like how serious this is and how it's not new. This is not a new tactic, and it has continued. And the longer it goes on, the more sinister they become.
Yes.
Okay, I can also read some comments before we move on. Okay, so yeah, there has been a long conversation parallel with our own. So I'm not going to be able to read everything. I'm just going to try to summarize what people are saying and pick out a few points. But yeah, there was like a very rigorous discussion about the two different anti-war rallies. Dust James Nettleton says, no one is dismissing the masses of white folks. Everyone is invited. I think he means the March Answer Coalition rally. So he's saying everyone's invited to that rally in March. Even those micro-organizations are far more substantial than the few public figures and influencers from the February March. Then someone whose username is Willingly Nomadic says, people becoming more globally aware will eventually better help them to accept new forms of governing, and I'm heartened by the prospect. DJ Elf says, war is not pushed by the people, but by the people in power. There's some legislative work going on to achieve this change, and organizing for 24 can be, I think the 2024 election. But he says, I'm telling you right now that the obstruction of generational victims of war, like me, because he's Korean American, despite my work in this space, is obscene and wrong. We are replacing activists with celebrities. And so he's saying, like, would you, for instance, like, would you organize a conference about reparations without Black people? And he's also making the same claim that, like, he's making the same accusation that the February March was organized excluding Asian people. And then Dust James Nettleton is asking, I think this is when we said that the Answer Coalition rally is not connecting the war agenda with the issues at home. And so Dust James says, how are they not connecting it? And then is saying that it's not a counter rally against the February March. And then, okay, I'm going to keep going.
That's the question.
Yeah.
If it is not, then why is it being held?
Yeah.
I mean, what was the purpose of it? What was the timing of it? And why did the March have to proceed on the basis of an attack upon the February March? Why did all of that go on?
Yeah.
If it was a march for peace and good faith.
Yeah.
That's all,
Yeah. And then Christopher Romero says, domestically, we seem to be seeing a purposeful redirection of an emerging working class consciousness that directly opposes our government's actions both abroad and how it influences us at home. and continues, there are those whose interests align with the constant US intervention abroad who want to redirect the energy to a quote unquote more acceptable version of what would otherwise be a complete solidarity movement. And then people are saying that some of the people who organized the February march, including Nick Brana, Caleb Maupin from CPI, they're saying that they're abusive, that they have abusive that they have abusive history towards the people in the organizations. And then Willingly Nomadic says, succumbing to the purity fetish, I think Shade mentioned this from Midwestern Marx, but succumbing to the purity fetish is to become a reactionary. You're allowed to have feelings on the matter, but you cannot let it guide you fully. And then people are having a discussion about, I think they're saying that like the February rally was like a petty bourgeois rally, and that it's putting the petty bourgeois as the face of the anti-war movement. There's a lot of comments. Willingly Nomadic, I think this was directed at me, says, how do you feel that quote unquote meeting the moment would be proven? Is it purely based on the size of each event? And I don't think that really like meeting the moment is about the size, but just from our experience of the February rally, I think for a lot of us, and we've talked about it before, but for a lot of us, it was really impactful to hear people like Dennis Kucinich speak, because I think that was really one of the moments where it crystallized that here was someone who was actually not willing to just say what people wanted to hear, but also was willing to challenge the people who were at the rally, and that you felt a qualitative shift in how people were feeling. And this was just something that we sensed at DC in that rally. But I think for us, really, it's not something that is so much tangible, like quantitative as qualitative. Whatever you're doing, how are the people changing? Like, are the people changing through this effort and changing in a positive direction? And then DJ Alpha saying, someone from the Wu-Tang Clan who was originally supposed to speak at the February march dropped out. And then Dust James Nettleton says, I'm a white worker in the South. Black Agenda Report never told me to hate myself. They have been one of the few voices that inform me and push me towards anti-imperialist politics. Emile Palmier writes, I don't think it's necessarily a question of the right language or the correct terminology, but rather the question of what is the purpose of our conversation? Are we more concerned about being polite towards the academy, or are we more concerned about hearing and communicating with working people, the etiquette of the elite, or a dialogue with the dispossessed? And then Todd Doherty says, in a discussion with Brian Berletic on the YouTube channel New Atlas, Angelo Giuliano referenced the CPC's diplomatic policy, which I paraphrase as, quote, let's focus on what unites us and set aside our differences. How do we incorporate this sentiment from the Communist Party of China here in the US? And then, there's more discussion about the petty bourgeois thing. Christopher Romero adds, if the trains fail, then the US is in for a catastrophic time. And then, there's a lot of comments. Dust James says, Trump and Bernie's purpose is to jump ahead of the changes in the masses and to direct them back into supporting the imperialist establishment. Trump helped to brand anti-establishment politics as racist. And then, DJ Alpha is again saying that the fact that he was excluded from the event is a symptom of a larger problem. So his exclusion from the February rally. More comments. I'm gonna skip ahead a bit. And then Christopher Romero says any organic movement must stem from a love for the people. Todd Doherty is responding to Dust James and saying that our larger point is that if you were not able to help the anti-war effort, you should at least not hurt it. Set aside the personal issues to achieve the universal. And then, Christopher Romero adds that the U.S. is pushing for conflict with Mexico as well, which is more fuel for the war machine. And then, I think the big question that's coming from people like Dust and DJ Elf is Dust's question, how can you attack those who brought criticism on the February march, while also he's also saying while we're also attacking this weekend's march, like the next weekend's march in the anti-coalition. Todd saying, "Dust, you're missing the forest for the trees," and then someone just added on YouTube whose name is just a username. Why not learn? Good morning. I just got here. I don't want to detract from the conversation. However, will Dr. Anthony Montero be having a dialogue or debate with anyone from Black Alliance for Peace, such as people like Ajamu Baraka?
Definitely. Definitely. And it has to be held. It has to be had. You know? Yeah, I don't want to talk too much here. Definitely.
Yeah, I think a lot of these questions are also relevant for the Korea event too, and
definitely
crystallizing also like and concretizing like how we understand the purpose of the Korea event in light of this.
Because and I know we're going to go to our discussion of the Korea event. See, if we don't solve this problem created by 2 peace marches over Ukraine, what makes you think that if the U.S. provokes a war with China or comes the back door by provoking a war in North Korea, that we will be prepared to fight for unity on those questions? It's the thing, and I would say, I think somebody said, well, how can you critique the people that are having the March for critiquing the people that had the February march? Aren't you doing what they're doing? And I would say, no, I am not. Because what I'm trying to say, in the name of peace, in the name of democracy, in the name of the unity of the people, we have to get some things straight. Because I'm unclear. If you are for peace, why, when you saw the February march developing, you call an alternative march using all kinds of spurious claims and statements about the right and the left? Okay, if you want to hold, now this is, let's keep it, I mean, I don't want to talk a lot, but if this is a left-wing march for peace, it is not a people's march for peace. It is the left, and I put inverted commas, the self-identified, self-defined left, calling as they said, a left march to oppose the right march, right-wing march. My point is, if you are the left, why didn't you call it a people's march for peace? Why is it a left wing? Why does the left, as you define yourself, separate itself from the sentiments, political organization, political ideas of the masses of working, lower middle class people? Why? And that's what they're doing. Somebody said, will I discuss this with Ajamu? I would welcome it with a heartbeat. Let's do it. We need to get it clear. I mean, for everybody's sake. Just a small thing. You can't, when the question of truth is on the table, let's stop all of this nickel and dime espionage just behind everybody's backs, conversations. That's what I want to get clear, because the danger of war and nuclear war, not just in Ukraine, but in China, in North Korea. And how are we going to behave responsibly and in good faith in the name of peace and democracy going forward.
Yeah, there's. I'll just read two more comments. Okay, sorry. I know that sometimes people say their names from previous live streams because they have like usernames, but I forget them. But E Pluribus Regnum says he gives a quote from Mao and then a quote from Marx, and the quote from Mao is, "As for people who are politically backward, communists should not slight or despise them, but should befriend them, unite with them, convince them, and encourage them to go forward." And then also the quote from Marx is, quote, "Communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order. In all these movements, they bring to the forefront the property question." And then the person who asked about Ajamu Baraka says, I saw Dr. Anthony Montero's interview on Black Power Media. It was great. However, it was immensely controversial, in particular, Doc's views on Garvey. Then asks, what are your views on Walter Rodney? I don't know if we want to get into that right now.
No,
yeah.
just to the right. No, that's not important. You know, at this time.
Yeah.
My views on Garvey were my views on Garveyism.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about as an ideological political movement that reasserts itself in the 1960s as a force against the Black freedom movement and the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. That's what I was talking about. And the residue of that divisionary kind of politics in this time. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I've been rereading Paul Robeson's autobiography, and it's so interesting because he completely confirms everything we say. Like, he always attacks the ruling class, the white ruling class. And he even says in so many, and really just this fundamental belief in the majority and this whole conversation about democracy, that is the difference between revolutionary democracy and liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is so focused on the minority rights, which really is a code for saying the minority, which is the elite. That's really what's being protected. Revolutionary democracy is about the struggle to unite the majority, to unite the masses in their common interests. And I just wanted to read this quote from Paul Robeson, which is so beautiful. And it's from the last chapter, The Power of Negro Action. The granting of our demand would not lessen the democratic rights of white people. On the contrary, it would enormously strengthen the base of democracy for all Americans. We ask for nothing that is not ours by right, and herein lies the great moral power of our demand. It is the admitted rightness of our claims which has earned us the moral support of the majority of white Americans. The moral support of the American majority is largely passive today, but what must be recognized, and here we see the decisive power of Negro action, is this: wherever and whenever we, the Negro people, claim our lawful rights with all of the earnestness, dignity, and determination that we can demonstrate, the moral support of the American people will become an active force on our side. And like later at the end, he talks about the crusade for freedom that they're interested in. So Americans who wish for peace among nations, and I believe the vast majority of them do, can join my people in singing our old-time song, I'm going to lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. I'm going to study war no more. And it's just so beautiful because this is the way true revolutionaries proceed, with this fundamental belief in the moral capacity of the majority. And I think this whole conversation about the march has to be seen in that light. Like, what would Robeson have said about this march? What would Du Bois and King have said? And that really was what the nonviolent struggle was about, because Doc, you'd mentioned how this idea of nonviolence and King is under attack. And it's really an attack on the American people and King's belief in the American people and their willingness and capacity to be moved by this moral strength. So yeah, I just wanted to add that because he came up so much in our conversations.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think about that a lot too, where like I was like, what would King have done if he were to? He would have been there at the February March. Yeah. And like I remember, like, I've been thinking a lot about his speech at Riverside Church, where he said, he was like, everyone told me not to take a stand against the war in Vietnam. And that was much more like we've been saying at Free School, like that was much more, what's the word, contentious, like that was much more controversial at the time. And because of the anti-communism. And King said, he was like, people told me civil rights and the stand against the war don't mix. And he said, but I can't in good conscience not speak up, because at that time there were, student protests. And King said, he was like, I have to take this moral, courageous stance for peace. And it's funny because back then, actually, the charge against King was being anti-communist. And I feel like here in February, what people are saying against the February march is they're fascist, because they're dealing with people who are maybe Trump supporters, or like who are not considered the left, they're to the right or whatever. And I think that's interesting to compare. But I also like what you were reading, Megna, about Robeson. That's the thing. Du Bois, King, Robeson, and James Baldwin, they all say the same thing, which is, at the end of the day, like, what is your relationship to the war maker? Are you standing with or against the war maker? That is the question. And you have to ask yourself that. And I was remembering, like, hearing you talk about Robeson, Megna, it reminded me of how Baldwin said, like, I remember when we were celebrating Baldwin and Nuri was pulling these really beautiful passages from Baldwin. There was that really beautiful line where Baldwin said, if we're ever going to get out of this crisis that is America, we will need a new language. Like, it will require a new language that unites the American people. And I was like, is that not what we're seeing today? That there's a new language emerging? That's what we heard in February when we were at that march. Dennis Kucinich, Tulsi Gabbard, like, and honestly, all the other speakers as well. They're YouTube. A lot of them are like podcasters and internet personalities. But when you hear Dennis Kucinich speak, or even if you read Scott Ritter's speech that he didn't give at the march, it's a new language. It's a new language emerging. It's not even like quote unquote perfect, but there's something new being born. I guess that's what you were saying, Michelle, about creativity. And it's a synthesis too. I really see it as a synthesis. And it really is all due to King, because King started this. And what we have to finish is what King started. A new language. Like, this is a new American people stumbling and grappling for a new language, a new identity. And who are we to not support whatever in the February march, what they're trying to continue? Like, and that's what I feel like we're saying is the march going to even continue what started in February? Well, they should answer the question then. Okay, answer the question. Is the march going to continue what started in February? Because all the criticisms I've heard that the people as part of the march is that they're purposely trying to say that the February march did things wrong. We're going to do it right. And I think that's the answer.
Emily, to your point too, I just wanted to say, like, for me, when I was hearing you speak too about the new language that's being formed by these people who are speaking in February, it reminded me of Megna's earlier points too about taking the essence out of language. And I think what they really did was, like you said, they weren't perfect by no means, but their essence is what spoke to us, at least. Like, I can't speak for everybody who was there because it was a very diverse crowd. Lots of people were there to like counter the march, but there was more so people there, I feel like, who understood the message, and the message was anti-war. It was as blank as it can be. I don't get how you can confuse that. And then to the second point, to your question to the people going to the march that's happening this month, is it going to continue what happened in February? And like, you answered your own question when they're attacking it. And that goes to like some of the YouTube comments we're getting now that's saying, we can have multiple marches because we need multiple demonstrations of freedom. I agree, but I don't think, just like Emily said, I don't think that this march that's happening is in the same vein as the one in February. And I think that's very clear because, like you said, if it was a matter of we just want multiple demonstrations of peace and we want to continue the spirit that we felt last month, they wouldn't have attacked those people like they did. And that's what's so confusing to me is like, yes, human beings are very complex and each person has their own perspective, but we all understand kind of like what Todd Doherty was saying in the comments, like people miss the forest for the trees. And we know what the message is. The message is clear. We want unity and we want peace and we value life. And that's what each person last month, for me, that's what I got from their speeches. Even though they all came from a different point of view, each one of them opened and closed on that remark. And that's what's important.
Yeah, and not to belabor the point, but I do think it's disrespectful to claim leftists or want to be revolutionary and not know King. I just think it's
There's
just
no two ways about that.
and what I mean is that, well, there's a selective type of ignorance. Like, this is purposeful. Like, you want to put down King. You want to put down the people. You want to put down democracy in America. You do not want to see the February March for what it was, because you rather put yourself be before the people. You rather not study because you think you know everything, or at least that's what you're doing. And
Exactly what's happening.
right. And I think, to the new language point, like, all of what would happen from the march is like Doc saying, is like what Doc was saying, like, you're in the way to building this new democracy, to building a new people, transforming the people to become like the essence of what they actually are. You're distracting, and that's dangerous. Now it's not like a simple matter of popularity or your own internal like, oh, I have to do this group because this group. Like, it's not about these like sectarian left groups anymore. It's not about y'all. What it's about is how the world can move forward. And if you don't see it as a broader question of peace, if you don't see it as a world historic movement, then you're totally missing the point. It's not about who likes what ideology, for the same instance of like, okay, well, why Garvey? Well, we're not really talking about Garvey. It's the principles of King and studying King. The other facts of that, like, we could talk about that later, like on the side. Like, I just think that right now in this discussion that we're having is to discuss why was the February March important, and how can we build a new democracy? What principles are democratic? I just think that is, I agree with everybody. I'm glad to be brought to the conversation, to be honest.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing. Maybe we talked about this quite a lot, but this question of building unity in this country and in this moment is a serious question. It's not easy, but it's not completely hopeless either. It's not easy because there is so much historical baggage on the American people, and building unity really requires, like, revolutionaries, and it requires revolutionary ideology. And what it does not need is what Doc, you were saying, is brinksmanship. Like, this thing about being excluded, I really, like, I'm confused because we were there and we are, like, a bunch of Asian, black, all kinds of people. We were there, we didn't feel excluded. But when people say that they were excluded, what they really mean is they were not paid homage to. They were not treated like they are the vanguards of this movement. And it makes me think, like Fred Hampton, King, before they were reaching out to unite with the white working class, were they waiting for people to come to them and say, oh no, you are great, so now you can, like, now you're through the door? That's not how unity is built. You have to begin from trust and, like, just be ideologically predisposed to trust the capacity of people to grow and to build unity with. And also, like, if this was like the February March, if it was organized by people who, in the past historically have not been called upon to lead mass movements before, isn't it so much more hopeful that they are trying to? That's a positive thing that they're rising to the occasion now. even if like there is way, like that movement has ways to go in terms of how it's going to grow in the future, but it's an inherently helpful thing, uh, which I feel like a lot of people don't recognize. And lastly, this thing about, oh, you criticize people who attack that march, but then you attack this march. They're not equivalent, and there are so many of these false equivalencies that are being like thrust down people's throat. They're not equivalent because ideologically one is for something and the other is against something. And we stand for people who are for something, who are for peace, who want to organize the masses for peace and for a new democracy in this country. So they're not equivalent. um, I say this because it also came up in that interview doc you did with so yeah, anyway, I just wanted to say that.
And just to throw in one more thing about Megna, what you said about Paul Robeson, like him standing with my people. That image came up, and I'm just like thinking about us being at the march in February, and then also the question of like the American people, like who are the American people? And also how we talk about like the Black proletariat being the essence of the American people. It seems like we're working out, like, okay, is the language of revolution, like the revolutionary language that people are trying to work out, is it emerging out, or is it already something that is there, and we're like and we're able to think about it? And that also gets into the question about like, well, free school, we have been able to talk about like the world house. We've been talking about civilizational unity for so long. And, that we have language. But what I'm also thinking about is like, well, it's not like there wasn't any Black people at the February March. And I'm not talking about like the leftists and things like that. But I think like the majority, see, if like the people, if someone did like a study of like the races who were at the February March, it would prove interesting, because then it kind of shows, because I feel like in maybe a previous year or like months ago, I might have been reserved to say, or I haven't thought about as much like how working people are together more. And I think that in Philadelphia, it's a Black city, but there's white people working with Black people in the city and in Pennsylvania broadly. So I just think that like we're coming to other questions about like, well, really, where are the American people? Where are Black people in relation to each other in this country? And I think like about the question about the new language or the new worldview that you're pointing out, Emily, like, is it something that, because is the core of it something that people know already and we're able to latch onto it because we've studied it so long and we're able to articulate and express feelings and ideas that people have? And so I'm just thinking like us working these ideas out in free school is not in a bubble, but I also think that we're doing something that's relevant, meaning that it's something that's also ongoing and happening amongst America broadly. Like I think the questions of war and peace, for example, are questions that everyday people think about at this point, because we cannot have another war, and then like a war economy cannot function.
Let's get the war economy.
So I just think that it's interesting that we're having this conversation, because it opens up different questions about the moment that we're in, like the presidential campaign and like, that kind of thing. So I think, it presents opportunities like that. I wanted to bring it up because I think that when Paul Robeson is saying like, I stand by my people, we can also think about my people and not just like, oh, I stand by Black people, like Trotskyites and leftists when I say like, I stand by Black people. Okay, well, you can go ahead and be, or, put yourself ahead of somebody, a fantasy. It's just a fantasy at this point. But that's not real people. That's not the everyday people who want a better world for their kids and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to Purba's point also, and maybe to Serafina's also, that actually in Robeson's autobiography, he knows he's been erased. And he even says, yes, there's this wonderful boycott going on. I'm so happy it's going on. And he even says, yeah, I'm so happy that there are other artists who are playing at segregated venues. I tried to do that, and I'm really glad that others are doing it too. And just like you're so struck by the humility of this man, because he was like the battering ram against these racist lynch mobs, and he broke through and he made this huge contribution, and then he is erased and denigrated and diminished, and he's writing this book when he's not allowed to travel. And so and so other forces are coming up, and he's just happy. He's happy for the contribution he made to history, because for him it was never about being acknowledged. And that's the character of a revolutionary. It's not about you. It's about the movement of history. It's about the people. It's not about the specific way. He's not saying you all aren't communist enough or whatever, but he brings it back to these larger historical issues. Is the ending of segregation going to usher in a new world? Is it on the side of a new world democracy? What is the character of Black leadership needed to bring in this new world? What is the essential nature of the American people? And just, yeah, it's so beautiful. But yeah, just to your point, Purba.
Emily, do you think we could move to the Korea event?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I know there are a lot of comments still going, but I think we should move to.
Why don't we do? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you want to do comments?
Well, they won't
I
take
feel like some of them are just bringing up the same points from earlier, and it's becoming a bit of a circular.
Oh, okay.
In circles, I feel like, and maybe some of the questions could even be addressed by when we talk about the Korea event.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So wait, we're gonna do the Korea part now?
We're going to Korea now.
Oh.
Sure.
Okay. So I thought you want to talk about the exhibit?
Well, okay, I think for the Korea event, like we're calling it, I guess, the Korea event, but it really is about peace. And I think I'm really going to try to not jump back into like the discussion that we were just in, but I do think that the anti-war rallies are about Ukraine because there's literally a war being fought right now. Like that's very concrete. Like the billions of dollars that are being sent have to be understood. And then through that, I feel like it opens up a broader discussion, which is why do we do all of this in the first place? Like why do we have billions of dollars in like all of these US bases around the world? And then through that, I feel like you can expose the entire nature of US imperialism and like US hegemony and how that is like such an obstacle to this world democracy that we're talking about. And so I feel like that's the principled way to approach peace. And we're talking about Korea, like because the division that has been perpetuated for 70 years is of global importance. And the Korean War was an issue for all of humanity. Like it was seen as potentially like World War III, like something that, I guess, a colossal scale that literally had not been seen before. And so when we're talking about Korea, we're also not talking about it just because some of the organizers are Korean American. It's that Korea is an example to humanity. Korea does not belong to just Korean Americans who have been personally victimized by the war, but to all humanity who saw it and stood up for it. And that's the message and that's the spirit with which we're approaching this event. Mm-hmm. And so that's also why I think the conversation about Du Bois and Robeson and King are incredibly important for this time. Because the way that Robeson stood up, the way that Du Bois stood up, the way that they were willing to sacrifice, and they did sacrifice and they paid a price for it, but they never regretted it because they knew that it was important to all of humanity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's basically the essential principle of the event, like the sort of spirit that this peace movement needs to take, and like the fundamental ideas that can actually build unity, like can actually concretely build unity, instead of just saying like, oh, like I support this, or like, oh, everything is good. But no, we want clarity that's based on actual principle. And I think that's the thing, which is that it can't be anti-communist, but it also can't be, I guess, elitist in a way. Yeah, and so I think that's broadly like the main connection that we're trying to draw, where it's, yeah, I feel like we in the free school have been seeing this very much as a continuation, like this event, which we've been planning, I guess, since basically November, December of last year. And it came out of the 10th anniversary, which we saw as our vision for a new American people, how to build unity, how to actually come together and solve the problems that we see in our country. And then with the February march that we went to and like witnessed and were lucky to be a part of and see, and the Black Reconstruction event where we're actually revisiting the Second American Revolution, the Third American Revolution of Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement, to really draw a path to today, which we see as potentially like the beginning of the Fourth American Revolution, where we can actually like complete democracy, win a people's democracy. And so the Korea matters because it's something that started 70 years ago, and it needs to be understood again today. Because you can frame it, I guess, in a negative way of like, oh, the US has like done so many bad things for the last century, but we actually see it as, no, it's an opportunity to like start again. Like we can still recognize the humanity of the Korean people, and it's not too late, but the time is now to make right. Yeah, so I think that's basically how I've been thinking about it more like concretely over the last week, where it's not just like nice ideas or like intellectual things, but actually like political practice that's urgent to this current moment.
Yeah, just to quickly add, I think something that's become more clear, especially within the past week or so, because we've been working with people and talking with people to prepare for the different panels and presentations that will be given, is that, yeah, like if we just wanted to do something because we thought Korea was an interesting place, you know, like maybe someone could write an article about it, but we wouldn't be doing an event just because we think Korea is cool, or because Korea is interesting, or because we're treating Korea as like a thing in itself, if that makes sense. But we're actually like, what's becoming clearer, and even through this discussion, is that Korea provides an opportunity for us to also push for the worldview of people like Du Bois, of Robeson and King, because without those figures, you can't even make sense of what's going on in Korea, both its history, but also the present moment. And so what we're trying to offer to the people is it's not just that we're trying to be like, this is the correct view what's happening in Korea. What we're trying to do is we're trying to present an entire worldview, which is, like our worldview in the free school, which is based on the ideas of these people that we've been talking about, because that we think that they are an asset to the American people in terms of how they can actually fight for peace and for unity, and how they can relate to the rest of the world. And I think, it's just something that's been coming more concrete and more clear through discussions in the past week or so. Because, all of, like, if you go through the program, like all of the themes and topics that are going to be discussed, and also the exhibit itself, which I'm like, all of us are really excited about, like the art exhibit. But like it's just like what's been really beautiful is that things have been evolved. Like the purpose of this event has become more clear, I think, and like the fact that like we really think that like that what we have been trying to work on in the free school over all of these months and years is like a new vision that we can present to the American people, and that this event itself, how I see it and how we see it, is that this is also a democratic forum for the people to come together and to find their own way forward on the question of war and peace, and like how they can relate to a country that has been decimated by American bombs, that has been starved deliberately by this government. Like we're just not looking at we're not looking at Korea because it's interesting and that's cool and because we happen to be Koreans, but because first, as Nuri was saying, the Korean War was a world event. It was an event that shaped world history. It also shaped the destiny of America itself over the past 70 years. And and yeah, so like the way that we're approaching this is that we're not treating Korea as a thing in itself, but as a thing for humanity, as a thing for the American people, you know, because they are also involved in this process. And that, like, at a time when, as people have been saying, the people are more distrustful of the ruling class and the media than ever before, like, why not try to provide a forum for the people to come together, people of all different kinds of backgrounds, to try to be like, okay, like, let's actually try to figure out what is the truth, what is the path forward, how can we actually achieve peace together on our own terms and not on any terms set by the ruling class. And what we think the free school strong hand is, like, these people like Du Bois and King and Robeson and Baldwin, who are an asset to the American people, who can be a tool for the American people to actually find a way forward in this time of crisis, when there's so many different areas of the world which could basically become like flashpoints of nuclear war. And that we think that, yeah, like that this tradition that we're rooted in and that we're trying to offer to people is like, yeah, that this is like the that this can be a path forward for the broad American people as well. But yeah.
And the reason why I said what I said about King is not to like be braggadocious, but just like, because like, why know anything? Like, why want to become in the,
Why know anything?
and I think that it's emotional because, you know, to be able to stand up and say why we celebrate Korea for anybody, why we celebrate Du Bois, Baldwin, and King, is because we're taking that responsibility, and we know, like, in our hearts, like, not only what they've dedicated their lives to, and what China, Korea, Russia have dedicated and are struggling, you know, like, to go towards like peace and democracy, to really do that. Mm-hmm. That's why we know anything. And another thing is that, well,
could you explain the struggle, the path towards peace and democracy? You say that's why we know anything. Could you kind of tease that out?
Because what I mean is that, or what I'm emphasizing is a certain responsibility after you know what the right thing is to do. You know, because you could blindly want to do the right thing, or like want to do good and not feel, and you know, there's like an excitement to it, like, oh wow, like I'm doing something that's right. But then like King, like after being jailed, after being told not to talk about Vietnam, and yet he still says the right thing, and yet he still stands by peace. That is the certain courage, or that is a certain will, that certain responsibility after you know, like, what is the truth, to stand by. That's why knowledge is important, and then I guess acting upon it, you know, is important. That's what I was saying then. But the other point that I was thinking about was how everybody in free school, because what you guys were talking about, it made me like reflect about us as like a group of people. And I think in this moment, the ruling class want to hit like the American people at all sides, like in all different ways, like, and give us spoon-fed ways to lie about who we are and where we come from. You know, and I think that, you know, we're also now able to like attack on all sides. We're able to attack the ruling class on all sides, too. Because we all come from different places, and we're we have different experiences. And I think it makes me reflect about that, because in working together and in knowing what the World House actually could be, it gives us that responsibility to do these kind of forums, which you call a democratic forum, which I also think is an important explanation to the event itself. And it allows other people to see the possibilities of a new world coming into being, like we talked about.
Yeah, because I think, I think there was a question earlier about like what would be the praxis that derives from Du Bois and King. And I think that it's important not to think about it in kind of a dogmatic way where we like trying to exactly replicate exactly what happened during the civil rights movement, because that period already passed. The things that it accomplished have already happened. And I think it reminds me of, there is this interview with C.T. Vivian for the King in the Wilderness documentary, where he says the point of our struggles was, he was like, it was very important for us to have victories. It was important for us to have periods of struggle and movements and acts of, like the kind of nonviolent acts that they were doing, but things that actually instilled in the people a confidence in their ability to change society and to struggle for a new future. That's what we're trying to do. Like that is what it's almost like you're distilling the essence of the nonviolent struggle, and we're trying to apply it in a new way for a new time, given the realities and the needs of this moment, where like, yeah, the thing is that like where people are discontented and they are distrustful of the ruling class, but what we're trying to bring out and to invite people into conversation is to try to deepen and broaden people's confidence in their own ability to decide on these existential questions that can decide humanity's future, because what we do in America has so much resonance for what happens around the rest of the world. And like we think that it's exactly the right time for like all kinds of people in America and in the city of Philadelphia to realize that and to be aware of that and to feel in themselves the confidence that they can decide these things on their own terms. And that's kind of how I feel, is like, it's not like we're just trying to dogmatically apply the things from the civil rights movement, but we're trying to, develop them in a new way for a new time. And yeah, it relates to Korea, but also like fundamentally, it's a question of how are we trying to deepen and expand the democratic capacity and the confidence of the people in themselves, and their own capacity to unite, and to unite in new ways, to develop new social relations with each other. And so yeah, that's kind of like how, just building off what Seraphina's saying, like how I'm also seeing the event.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I'm really excited about the event because I think I said the exact same thing 2 weeks ago, which is kind of embarrassing, but I really do feel like it's pretty amazing that, okay, amazing is not the right word, but okay, let me take a step back. I've kind of, this past week, I've been a little agitated, like on edge. And like, I can't tell if I'm even agitated right now because I'm on my second cup of coffee, because Alice insisted that I have a second cup of coffee. But I actually think I've been agitated because this whole week has been like, I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but I feel like this whole week has been news about war. And then for me, Biden's budget was like another nail in the coffin, where Biden and the establishment, they're grasping for straws because they know they've lost the people. That's why he made it a point to say, I'm going to like the white Northeast Philadelphia working class painters, whatever, glazers, and like, the aesthetic is like all these working people are standing behind him. But not just Biden, but I mean, the government has lost the people. And around the world, I feel like it's kind of, to me, like, I think the timing is uncanny. Like, I feel like free school events always happen at just the right moment. I think it makes complete sense that next week, while there's a march in DC saying peace in Ukraine, whatever that means, we will be having an event that we've already planned on Korea. Because essentially what we're talking about is like the US wants war with China. They've lost the people, and all they know how to do is make war.
Mhm.
For what purpose? And that's what we're going to talk about. Because and like yeah, because I was talking to Nuri and Jeremiah earlier too, because like, okay, again, I feel like I'm just going to talk about my presentation because that's really what I've been thinking about a lot is the question of America and civilization and war and peace. But yeah, honestly, I really feel like the Korean War in history, McCarthyism, the Korean War, like after World War II, that is when America became perverted, so severely perverted as a society and a civilization. And it's in a lot of ways, I think it also relates to Black Reconstruction and Du Bois, where Du Bois said America's history has been a history of revolutions, like constantly the people making slow, steady steps to advancing the democratic struggle. That we have that history. But then here in the 1940s, the 1950s with the Korean War, that's when America, in King's words, became the purveyor of violence around the whole world. And then what did that do to the American people? We're seeing the results today. And I feel like that's why I think the event next week is so timely, because that's all you're hearing about is war. You know, like I think you described it perfectly, Doc, earlier. Like I feel like you set the stage for Free School today so perfectly by saying not just war literally around the world, when the majority of humanity, dark humanity, is taking steps forward to be free for a new world. But that there's also war in the US, East Palestine, those people who still don't know, is the air polluted or not? Is our water polluted or not? Like, you know, we've talked about the poverty, the lack of education, you know, the violence, gun violence. There's war in the streets all across the US. And I think this is the time with the Korea event to like lift up Baldwin, Du Bois, Robeson, King. These are the figures that the whole world needs to hear. That the whole world needs to hear about the American people, specifically the Black freedom movement, where Baldwin said, he's like, every bombed village in Vietnam is my hometown. And yeah, I have a lot of feelings, and like it's almost like I'm agitated because the stakes are so effing high. And that's why the march next week kind of pisses me off. I'm sorry, it does. It pisses me off. Because this is the conversation that has to be had. Like, what about Robeson? What about King? Like this is what Nuri was saying. They paid the ultimate price to take a stand for peace. And here you have Trump who's saying, I will be your retribution. The people of East Palestine, the victims of gun violence, I will be your retribution of the working people. And how can you like call him a fascist? Here he is saying he will be the peace candidate. And I feel like this is the stuff that we just have to be clear on. Like this is Free School. And this is the event next week. Like, let's just be clear on who the enemy is. The war makers, Biden, who wants to drag us into war with China. And they will use North Korea against China too. But like, I mean, the Korean history, and I feel like that's also why, like, the more I hear about the program for the Korea event, I think it's so beautiful because we're going to also, like Jeremiah was saying, we're also going to be talking about how the people in Korea, they didn't just lie down. They've been fighting to make advances in democracy, not just for themselves, but for world democracy. It's the same in America too. Like when you read Black Reconstruction, it's so like beautiful because here you have the Black proletariat, formerly enslaved just a few years ago, fighting, like taking those steady steps forward for democracy, not just for Black people, for white people too. Public schools, like what would it look like to redistribute land? Like this is the history of our own people too. Like our people didn't just lie down. And this is the capacity, if only we can lift up the examples of Robeson and Du Bois and Baldwin and King. So optimistic. Because once you believe in the people, the past, the present, the future, like anything is possible. I know I just talked a lot, but I just have so many feelings, and I'm always just like, yeah, is this like God-given? Like, I just feel like everything is happening at the right moment, and we're in the right place too.
Yeah,
Well, I guess like also with this Korea thing, okay, first of all, I just want to preface, I feel like my brain is kind of working at half speed right now, so just bear with me. But well, actually, I think yeah, like going off of what Jeremiah and Nuri said about how like I think actually in the past week, we've really, I think, or it has been made really concrete to us what the purpose of this event is. I mean, I think like we had been talking about it for the past several months, like in our planning and everything. But actually, I think for me, at least, when it really clicked in a certain way, was we're actually kind of tweaking some parts of our art exhibit, which I know like a lot of people were excited about when we presented that last week. But actually, I think to me, like what made it kind of like I feel like the art exhibit at first, I think one potentially could have walked away with the idea, oh, is this really like Korea as a thing in itself, or is it Korea as a thing for itself, and therefore a thing for humanity? And what I'm getting at when I say that is, like, first of all, Doc has been so kind as to actually offer some paintings from his collection that will be displayed.
Oh, well,
And
good. Good. I'm glad you all accepted it. I didn't know.
well, but I think like what that actually did, because we actually like reconceptualized in many ways what like certain parts of the exhibits are going to look like. Because at the end, like we're actually, along with some parts about the Korean War and with some parts about, you know, modern North and South Korean art, we're going to be including, you know, works from Latin American, you know, from African American painters, because we really want to emphasize that actually the themes that are evident in a lot of Korean art and like Korean, like, or like photographs of Korea from that period are so like in sync and actually express the exact same strivings that the rest of humanity, that are evident in the rest of humanity. So, and I think that's when, and then after that, we were starting to have like panel discussions like within the panels. And then that's when I started to think like, because I'll be presenting about civilization in Korea, or so I thought. Because actually it is not just about like civilization as applied to Korea. It's actually like, first of all, how can we understand civilization as, you know, specifically Du Bois has formulated it, and specifically why is that so useful in understanding Korea, and why is that so useful and true in understanding how humanity is moving forward, how Korea is moving forward. I mean, I'll start there, but there's like a bunch of other stuff that I was thinking about. But if other people want to say something.
Just side note, I know I've been mentioning, fuck it. But so basically, like, when you stand by Du Bois and King and Robeson and Baldwin, like, it's equally as emotional because it has that universal, what you're saying already, Anna, like, there's a reason why all of humanity will come to these, like, the striving for freedom, the striving for these democratic things, like, there's a reason why it's so similar across the board, regardless of where it is that you're coming from. And I think that's also why it feels like what we're talking about is so eternal or so prophetic and so old and ancient and true. Because it's like, well, and why it's so emotional. Like, I'm sitting next to Doc and I'm like looking at him.
No, don't look at me.
I will, because, and I'll call you out for it, because I think that that there's a lot to that. There's a lot to that, you know, and it has to do with your involvement with the peace movement. It has to do with your life, and that's also fine.
Don't say too much.
I didn't.
Okay, that's enough.
So, but what I think is beautiful about what you were saying, Anna, is that like these figures that we stand by, and these figures who knew the Korea situation, who knew the situation in Vietnam, and because they were concerned about the peace question, they were concerned about democracy. It seems more simple to me now about why Du Bois, why King. Like, these aren't people that we just choose for no reason, or that even, like, for me, just because they're Black. Like, that isn't why. They live their life according to the principle of finding out truth to be used to better their people, our people, humanity, to better the entire world. That's how the world can get better, is with the truth. And without it, or to like ignore that, it's to just not be relevant, not talk about the relevant things, because it just gets back into the conversation that we had, and how our conversation that we did have about the protests has everything to do about moving forward with the Korea event. I just think that that's a beautiful thing, that, yeah, the exhibit will also showcase King Du Bois, Paul Robeson, Baldwin, and how they are ultimately tied, like we say, in a single garment of destiny with Korea. And I think like that is like the way, and that is the creative opening, the way to open up how we know Korea and how we can continue to know and get to know it, because this is also just a beginning. And even our understanding about like every event really was just a beginning in understanding India, China, and so on. Really just a preparation to how we can see their positions in the world, building towards democracy. It's really just the preparation of it. But it's, I think, a really good start. And the reason why I say it like that is because I was thinking about, because a couple people of us have had a phone call about the civilization panel, and I am reflecting about like Nuri's interrogations, because she was thinking about the international democracy stuff. And like, how is it possible that the people in free school, in that free school period, can even think about or begin to think about diplomatic relationships between people who we don't even know in different countries, and having different complex questions about their own democracies and historical situations? Like, I don't know Modi that much, but I do know that if he chooses humanity, or if there's things that, there's like ways that we see the worldview that we are using is helpful and beneficial, because we can be a part of the process, a part of working out the synthesis, like how America can fit in the world and not war upon the world. How I just think it's a great opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, and I guess like another thing that I guess we want to really show people with this event is, I think like for some casual observers of the free school, like they probably see us talking about the centrality of certain figures like King and Du Bois and Baldwin and Robeson, but actually like we want to show, I think this event, especially with Korea, I think Korea actually, we see it as like a big case study, or as like a big case in actually making concrete how and why is it that we do see these figures as guiding lights, not just for America, I mean, yes, obviously, but also for the world. Because, I mean, we're not just trying to present, for example, facts about Korea, but we're actually trying to present an entire worldview, and an entire, I mean, you could even call it like epistemology, or like set of assumptions that, observers, that at least we hope to impress to a certain extent on those who attend and those who see it. Because, these figures like Du Bois and King, like we don't just say them because we like them. It's because there is such like an essential truth to what they've said. And I think, yeah, I mean, for us as the organizers, being Korean American, I think it was a very profound journey actually, like coming up in this country a certain way, like being taught to think and to know Korea a certain way. And then actually with these figures, like I feel like we almost like came at Korea again, but in a completely different way. Like Korea, it was like revolutionizing Korea. I don't know how else to put it. I think somebody else can say it better. But yeah, and then I guess the other thing about democracy is that like when we talk about democracy, we're talking about something very specific, and it's not like all of these liberal assumptions that usually underlie democracy when people talk about it. And another way we want to make that concrete is actually through the format, is through the way of discussion, and the fact that actually we have so much faith in the attendees, in the people, to actually discuss what are the paths towards peace, especially in the United States. What is the way forward? Who are the American people, and what are they capable of? What are the possibilities? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think Kathy wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like I have so much to process from this conversation because I mean, I do every week. But I think today when we just sat down and started discussing, you know, the world situation, the peace rally in February, the peace rally in March, and then our event, I just feel like the question that I started thinking about that I think we've been raising around practice is really something that I've just really felt so keenly through this conversation. Just felt like we were really like Free School has been and is so ready and is like, you know, we're ready to get to work on these questions. And I just feel like we're really so well positioned because of our, you know, 10 years of study, our organizing, our discipline, and what we've been doing, and how we're listening so keenly to the movements, people on the move, both here in America, in Philadelphia, but in the world. So I'm really not saying anything that hasn't been said before, other than just to express just how grateful I am to be part of working as part of this event, to be part of Free School even, but also to work on the exhibition, because I think what we've been saying about, you know, our criteria, our benchmark for what everything we're doing, we're studying, we're putting forward is really in the hopes of being worthy of the people. And it's just been hitting me really hard these past few minutes, because I feel like we're asking ourselves, like, can like what we're doing be worthy of like the Korean people who for thousands of years have like, you know, made sacrifices in the name of peace, building temples and Buddhist monuments to instead of building weapons or launching invasions, or being able to, after in the aftermath of the Korean War, like publish magazines and raise the capacity of the people who are hungry for knowledge, or even Kim Il Sung's brave stances with the North Korean people with Vietnamese people when they themselves are going through a genocidal war on the part of the American imperialists, and all of his relationships. And it's sort of also in the same way we're asking ourselves, like, we really want to be worthy of the task that Du Bois, King, Baldwin Robeson left as like their, you know, ultimate struggle for peace. And it's the same thing we're asking ourselves today. And I think that at first, when we were starting to realize just how broad this exhibition is, I know like it was something I was like, where will this be going? Because we were just still working it out, especially even last week until this point. But it really is because I think we've been making huge strides in deepening our understanding and the significance of this event in this moment, and what it means to be, I suppose, really worthy of all of these people, but also ideas, and just the people today and what they're striving for. And I think also what we've been saying about trying to build a 21st century democracy, world democracy in like sort of our practice here with this event. It's all sort of coming together for me in a way that I feel like I just feel really humbled, but also really proud of what we're doing. And I just think that I think it is something to be taken seriously. And even if it doesn't look to many people whose idea of, I guess, practice has been warped by the left, or even think dogmatically around what that looks like, I just think it's been really important.
Yeah, because I think the thing about our worldview too is that we are actually thinking about history. like we're thinking about the development of humanity. Like I think Christopher Romero had a comment, something about expanding human capacity, like the social development of mankind. And I think that's where we're coming from. The reason that we are not as invested in the division or the struggles between the left or the right is because we are looking literally at the forward march of humanity. And we say like civilization because we are literally trying to understand 5,000 years of history and how all of that hinges around actually right now with like the age of imperialism and the age of humanity. Like when we're talking about 21st century world democracy, we're talking about basically a dream, like this process that has been like worked out and demonstrated and fought for over the last centuries. And it actually has resonance and possibility today. And so I think that's why like we look to King and Du Bois and Robeson in particular, because they had a practice that leaves something for us today, and not just as Americans, but for everybody in the world. And you can see that like when you look through the history books, like when you look up the pictures and you see the relationships of like Du Bois and Mao and Kim Il-sung and like Sekou Touré and Modibo Keita and all of these people who are fighting for their people, like the national liberation. And they're not just fighting for their countries, they're fighting for literally justice for humanity. And I just think that that's like the fundamental perspective that we're coming from. And I think I also feel kind of agitated because I think over the last week, like trying to really buckle down and like share our purpose. And I feel like I feel sad sometimes because I feel like people get caught up in other things and they want to make the conversation about something else that they're more focused on. And like I understand that impulse, but the thing is that we have our eyes on the prize. And it's literally like humanity, like war, like annihilation or peace, like world democracy. And I think that's also what our exhibit is trying to accomplish, like to visually ground that struggle, like how vital and how living it was, how civilization and the hope and the spirit of the future lives in like the masses of people in Korea and in Afro-America and in the world.
Yeah, I think I know we've been hyping up the exhibit, but I really am excited for it. I think it'll be a real, I don't know, yeah, like it is historic in a lot of many different ways. First of all, because we're showing North and South Korean modern art for the first time that we know of in Philadelphia as an actual like art exhibit. But that like I think part of the process of the past week or so has been like kind of bringing our pre-ideological assumptions to the surface and actually making a case for those pre-assumptions as well. Like we can see the possibility of a common conversation between North and South, like the best of the South Korean like movement for democracy with North Korea, in part because we're rooted in the principles of people like Du Bois and Robeson, who, like one of the few voices in American society, as people have been saying, to actually speak out for peace during the Korean War, like much before even things had matured to the point of the Vietnam War, like the anti-Vietnam War movement, and that they laid a groundwork for this. But I think one thing that we've been thinking about, or that I've been thinking about, is that, you know, like you can't understand the shape of the world to come if you don't know what it is emerging from. And what we're trying to say is that this new emerging world order that is coming into being, it is the child of the world anti-colonial movement, of the world peace movement, also of the world communist movement, and that North Korea is a way, it's like an opening for the American people to make contact with that history. Because otherwise, like if we don't know like what produced this world, like this new world order, then we will be basically, as King says, we'll be left asleep during a period of world revolution. I think that the other thing is that why we're also making a case for exactly these figures is that you also can't make sense of this new world and what democracy can mean in this 21st century without people like Du Bois, without people like Robeson, because I'm really excited for like all of the panels, but in particular like the second panel that Anna's moderating, that Alice and Jahan and I will be on, because part of it is that we're making a case that, like, I think Alice was saying this, but that the suppression of people like Du Bois and Robeson it's not even so much the suppression of them, but that they represented new knowledge categories, new knowledge and new theories of democracy, which are super, like, that are hugely beneficial for the whole world, that the whole world needs to hear in order to even understand where it's going, where the people of humanity are going. And that, yeah, it's not even the suppression of them, which is the problem, but the suppression of the knowledge and the truth that they represented and that they can give to the entire world. Because, you know, like, people, yeah, and I feel like this is just like things that we've been talking about for a long time in free school and arguments that we've been making, but it's just like we are, yeah, basically committing ourselves to making these arguments again because we think that they are necessary, that people like King and Du Bois are not just, yeah, like people for, like, people in themselves, but they are people for humanity. And that we're really trying to uplift these people in concert with what we see in the Korean struggle and how connected with the world struggle for peace and for a new democracy and for freedom, and for a total remaking of the whole world international relations themselves. So yeah.
Is anybody going to say anything about the discussion of Juche?
Yeah.
I think we're all going to imbibe the spirit of Juche. Well, because I think that was another, I think what Jeremiah was saying about Du Bois and Robeson, I guess Alice's presentation on like new knowledge and new theory on democracy. I think another way of framing that is like democracy as the fullest expression of human capacity, like of potential, so that every human being is able to make like a worthy contribution to like for the forward progress of humanity. And I think that's actually the ideal of democracy. And it's a question of, yeah, how do you actually put that into practice? How can you make it real? And in that way, it's completely distinct from theories of liberal democracy that are more emphasizing, I think, practice or like electoral things, stuff like that. But yeah, I think because I think some of us were reading like Juche, like Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, and there's remarkable resonance. And it's almost like we were only able to really understand it after reading Black Reconstruction for like 4 months.
Yeah.
Because the way that Du Bois like makes his assertion, he's like, I'm studying the American people. Like, I know the American people. I've lived my whole life among them. I've made it like my duty and my role to study them. And what I see is so much possibility. And that possibility needs to be realized basically through knowledge, like through leadership and knowledge and education. And with Juche too, it comes out of the experience of the Korean Revolution. Like, it comes out of the anti-Japanese imperialist struggle. It comes out of the struggle in the Korean War, the People's War against American imperialism. It comes out in like the reconstruction of society. And I think we were also talking about sort of the resonance between Reconstruction in North Korea and the Reconstruction era in America, because it asks the fundamental question, like, can the masses of men rule? Like, can they build a society that can provide the people's needs and also like actually contribute something new? And like, that's the way that we want to go about it. We're not just like looking at it from the outside and being like, oh, like, look at this image or like, look at this like idea and it's just abstract. Like, all of it means something today. And I feel like Juche too, like, we're not trying to categorize it like, oh, like, is it a development of Marxism, Leninism? Is it something else? Like, is it a personality cult? No, we're asking, like, what does this actually say philosophically about the nature and the potential of man? And so yeah, I feel like that is actually like free school too. So in that way, I feel like it has to be part of it.
Yeah, I feel like in our study of Juche, like, I was also just so struck because like Kim Jong-il, he literally writes that actually like it's supposed to be like a science, a way of understanding man and like man in his social capacity and also just in his capacity in general. Like, what is the essence of man? And I feel like actually it really kind of added in a certain depth in my understanding that I think free school has been saying for a long time that man and like man in his social capacity.
Sorry.
Wait. Okay, well, this whole idea that political economy is not the science that we need to understand man and his capacity, but rather it's sociology. And there was a while, I think, when that was said at first, I didn't understand it fully, but actually I feel like it almost mirrors like the free schools formulation and Du Bois's formulation that we need like a revolutionary social science, and that there is a revolutionary social science, and that the people can be known if only we have like the knowledge categories and like the types of knowledge necessary to uncover that.
Yeah, I think that like reading Kim Jong, I'm just like repeating what people are saying, but like reading Kim Jong Il's stuff on Juche, like it was just like it really just hit me. I was like, whoa, like the argument he's making is exactly the kind of argument that the free school is making right now, where we appreciate like the science of Marxism. We think that like it was a huge advancement to humanity and all of that, but like what we're like the way that we see Du Bois as not a derivative of Marxism or even like a new development of Marxism, but as Du Bois as a new qualitative social science, which meets the demands of, first of all, American society and the revolutionary path for America, but also contribute something new to the world itself, because it's addressing specific questions that are its area, like its object is different from really what Marxism is focused on. I think it's like, yeah, it was just like very, I don't know, kind of almost jarring, because like the kind of argument that Kim Jong Il was making was like, yeah, like we see Juche, like we assume Marxism and Leninism and all of that, but what Juche represents is not really even like a new stage of Marxism. It's like us trying to answer like a new set of questions that have emerged through the process of the Korean revolutionary struggle. And yeah, like I don't know, like it takes, like it literally has just, I'm repeating what others have said, but like it has taken all these years of trying to actually like immerse ourselves in the thought of Du Bois, of King, and all these other figures to like, even for me to be like, oh, that's what Juche is about. Like, because I feel like it's kind of presented as almost like like the North Koreans are just trying to make their mark and to be like, oh, we're so great, and to, to kind of promote themselves on the world scene. But like when you think about it, like a whole people, like a whole society has been organized around this philosophy, and it's not something to be taken lightly. In part because of what they've been able to achieve, and yeah, like there's so much parallel and resonance, as Nuri and Anna have been saying, between like how they formulated this new kind of social science and how even the free school is trying to develop and to promote like a new kind of social science that emerges from Du Bois. And so, yeah.
Adding to what all my peers are saying, when he talked, when we did that reading, he talks about it as something emerging from the struggle of Korean people out of practical necessity. And so in trying to make sense of what happened in the people's past and what to do about it, as others have said, they were able to draw upon the science of Marxism, but only so far. And reading Black Reconstruction, I mean, you also see that they're drawing from an economic perspective, but you only get so far. And then you have this opportunity to, I guess, think very creatively and draw out the science and logic of human beings that are not, I guess, economic forces, although we are in relation to economic forces. And I really thought it was incredible how they like were precise in saying that Juche was looking at man as a social being, and what that really meant, which was that's part of our historical development. And if you look at our historical development socially, rising from human cooperation, you can draw principles about the logic of development, and that, I mean, yeah, once as others have said, very much in line with what Du Bois has talked about. And so I feel part of the world, man. Reading Du Bois, reading Juche, I'm like, yeah, man, we on the same path. Let's get it. Let's keep going.
You know, what's also What was also really interesting in reading that piece by Kim Il-sung, or not Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il on Juche, is that he essentially says that when you raise the capacity of people for independence, for consciousness, for creativity, the sense that we get in the West is that people just end up doing their own thing. That society, because people have reached a level of freedom, that they'll just do whatever they want. But actually, in this piece, he says something different, like a science of social and human action, which is that as you raise people to a level of consciousness, people actually end up becoming more unified around a certain purpose. And, I think in like North Korea really is an example of this, like that tests out this hypothesis of human action. Like, is that true? Because Nuri said something, like Nuri said this before, which is that there's this belief that if you give people the necessities of life, there's this theory or this assumption that people will be lazy and not work. But what North Korea proves is that actually, if you give them the basic necessities of life, people are actually not lazy. They end up, I mean, these are generalizations, right? But people are actually more purposeful and more engaged in their society. And that was really interesting because as someone who's in the West or in America, you don't really have an example of that to look to actually prove or support that theory. And then also, I guess a separate point is that we really aren't talking about Du Bois and King in a superficial manner. Because I think for free school, it's been so easy for us to understand world revolutionary struggles because we have the framework and lens of Du Bois and King. That democracy, the lack of democracy in America means the lack of democracy in countries throughout the world. And that's what's been really interesting about, this process of, prepare for free school to prepare for the Korea event. I had to start with, because I guess people have been talking about their presentations, but I've been looking into South Korea in the 1980s. And it was really brutal in that period of time. And I was trying to make sense of it because it was such a sad occurrence. And I was trying to make sense of it through the lens of free school, which is that, the US being the greatest purveyor of violence throughout the world. But who in the US was speaking out against that? How could the US have been different? And it was figures like Du Bois and Robeson who spoke out against the Korean War, who were labeled as communists. And I guess that's back to what Jeremiah was saying, where my initial lens was, the suppression of Du Bois and King, or Du Bois and Robeson, and that what they represented in terms of a movement is what allowed for the anti-communism in Korea and elsewhere. But then I guess the switch on that framework was what was suppressed, both in America and also in Korea. I guess I'll stop there so that I don't give away my entire presentation. But I guess I say all that to say, like, Du Bois and King, like they have been so central to our understanding, not because like they were Black figures in history. Like, what was the substance of these figures in understanding America and the situation that we're in, but also the world. It's so easy actually to understand this new world order because we have Du Bois, because we have King. Whereas I guess Michelle was saying earlier, some people are stuck. They don't know how to make sense of this world situation. And it's because they don't have figures like Du Bois and King.
I agree with you, Alice. I also feel like this is something I wanted to get at too, because when Tony was speaking earlier, and Serafina too, about people calling themselves leftists and then not knowing King, and I was reflecting to just like being in elementary school, and like every time February came around and the only figure we did talk about was King, it made me feel like I had a pretentiousness towards him. Like, I feel like, oh, King is overrated. Like, we always only talk about King. But then being older and having a consciousness and realizing there's so much of King that I don't know. Like literally not even 1% of him is in my brain because of how our country and our leaders have basically like taken slithers of him and made him this appropriate figure for Black America. And then all they ever speak about, well, this is just my recollection, but all we ever spoke about with King was the I Have a Dream speech. And we only ever spoke about him in these ways that like wouldn't incite revolution. It's just these kind of like like factors about him. Like, yeah, of course we all want unity. And nobody talked about how revolutionary he is. Kind of like what your speech was, Tony, at the church on Martin Luther King's birthday. And you spoke about people saying we want to go back to the radical King, but it's like, when has he not been radical? And that's the thing. So many people do not know Martin Luther King as a radical figure, like to this day. And I think that's something that's really important that you've emphasized and that we continue to emphasize, like as a group, because yeah, you're right. And Michelle is right as well. People are stuck because they don't even know these figures to begin with. They don't even really take into consideration that America has produced a Baldwin, a King, a Robeson, a Winston, like, and those are huge people and these are huge ideas. So of course, naturally, because just like a psychological take, but naturally, your mind wants to do the least work, right? Gordon Allport's least effort principle. Nobody wants to think about these complex ideas all day, especially when your institutions aren't teaching them to you. So of course your brain's gonna let it wash over and go, those things don't matter. And those people don't matter. They didn't really change anything. But we're here to say that that's false. And that's very important.
Yeah. But I think the interesting thing is that, or what I also think is kind of beautiful, is part of why we believe in these figures is, although they've been suppressed, and especially for the younger generation, I think our working hypothesis and what we've also seen is that they're not alien to the American people. They're not inorganic to the American people. And I think especially for those, like, from whatever background, like, if you're interested in like change, but also if you're troubled, like for people who are troubled by what they see going on in America or even in a city like Philadelphia, it's like people like, yeah, like part of why we think that people are so discontented is because, like, even if King has been suppressed or Du Bois has been suppressed, like we believe that somewhere in the minds of the American people, King still lives. And he lives in, like, maybe it's not fully clearly expressed yet, but part of why people are so unhappy or why they're so discontented is because, like, the example and the memory of King still lives in some form in the consciousness of the American people, and that what we're trying to do is to bring that out into fruition, because it has been suppressed, but still, like, we don't think he's been totally, like, killed in the minds of the American people by the ruling class. And yeah, like, also the task too, but as you're saying, Shade, is like the task too is to teach a new generation to know King, and to know him in his full extent.
Real quick, it's kind of funny because, like, I was at the gym and I was thinking about people who were there or whatever, but like immigrants were told if they come to America, like, they could be free, and like I don't know, just like there's a certain narrative about the country. And like the good things about the country is that, like, well, nobody's going to tell you what to do or what to, believe. You could do whatever you want pretty much. And you can start your own business. And it's interesting because, and I'm excited for the showing for the documentary, because I had looked at it, and every time I see like a society or a North Korean society, I'm like, wow, that's a different way to do things. It's not bad at all. I don't think I was ever taught about North Korea, actually. So I'm self-taught, and I'm glad to be. But But I think it's the thing of like, well, what's promoted about American society are actually things that are kind of like contrary or like, you know, contrary to the growth of like human beings. Like, but you know, what's interesting is that there is, because that is only dependent on like, are we for is man for property, or is man for democracy? Is man for man? And you could use the same principles that American society has, and you can develop them for democracy as well. But then it's like, well, what Sade was saying made me think about like the philosophy that we live by. I remember like one time in the Du Bois meetings, we talked about how like, it talked about like the Lord of the Flies, and how the assumption of the Lord of the Flies book was that all like human nature was essentially evil, and like children would just like choose to kill each other. And but like what's interesting about that is that like in me thinking about being in the university, I know that it's just like, well, you're telling me that I can't do it, or you're making it impossible to actually read. I don't understand this. This is way too abstract. I just remember going through stuff like that, because it's like, well, what's the point in, you know, reading about the Civil War if I can't read about Black Reconstruction? I remember in Temple, like I would have Black Reconstruction and be in a Civil War.
Really?
I never told you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so,
Well,
no,
thank you for
no
that.
problem.
Okay, I appreciate it.
But the thing I'm getting at is like this question about how philosophy, or like, you know, the general worldview, the underpinning of all of our thinking, could actually be beneficial for human growth and development, and how it's essential to growth and development. And instead of putting down the people, we can actually raise the people up, raise ourselves up. And it'll be a totally different society. Like, we wouldn't have to think so negatively or pessimistically, or have like no vision. There actually is a vision to stand by, which is king. Anyway.
Yeah, that's why I found the Juche. It was the first time I was actually reading Juche seriously, and I found it interesting because, like basically the point I really remember is that Kim Jong-il was saying, he's like, people tend to think that man is just a dialectic of like the material with nature, like material man with nature. But he was making the point where he was like he broke it down as a science. He was like, it's actually, there's a dialectic between you as a material being, and then like your mind, or I forget the word he used, but basically like the dialectic between consciousness, like mind, and your capacity, and then your body, like your organic body. And I found that the reason why I was really attached to that was because this was Anna's point, I think, but it really reminded me of Du Bois, but it also really made me think about, like, I can't help but just think about like King as the father of the nation, and then Kim Il Sung as the father of that nation. Like, because the North Korea is very rural, agricultural. And I really felt like I could see Black America in North Korea, and how important, because there's a reason why Kim Jong-il is very attached to this idea of explaining. Juche is the whole idea of that man, it's man that man with consciousness can master like anything. And thus, like, and also the relationship between the individual consciousness, the individual man, and the collective. How you are transformed, like how important basically social relations are to master society. And there's something that there is like a resonance. Like, I just felt like it did resonate with how we even talk about America. Like Du Bois talks about, for example, like the dictatorship of the Black proletariat. And yeah, and like what Alice was saying, where in North Korea you see the example of okay, like a society denigrated, destroyed, industry destroyed. And what do you do in the aftermath of that to build? And that there's a deep, like, it's interesting that you have the leaders of North Korea saying, like, above all, what perhaps comes first is a deep need to understand that it's man who masters society, like social relations, and I kind of feel like in some ways that's similar to Afro-America and the way Du Bois even talks about like the dictatorship of the Black proletariat in South Carolina, where it's like this belief, if you go along with the belief of even the Lord of the Flies thing, which is the American assumption of like, oh, man is bad, like human nature is inherently selfish or bad or whatever. That's very different than even Juche or even what Du Bois is saying. It's the assumption that no, there's such thing as a dialectic of there's such thing as inner capacity or mind or consciousness. And I feel like that's the whole point of Du Bois, where he's like, when I write Black Reconstruction, I'm coming from the basic assumption that man can master, like the human factor. Yeah. That's something we talked about. Yeah. And yeah, I thought it was beautiful. Like, I really saw Afro-America in North Korea. And it also reminded me just of, like, we talked about it with India. And
I was just about to say that. Shut up. There's no.
Oh, it is. It's this thing of like the rural, like, and I feel like darker humanity is very connected in that way. And I even thought about how King, like, because part of my presentation I went to King's pilgrimage to nonviolence, because here you have the father of a new nation talking about Western civilization so perverted, America, the civilization so poisoned by war. Like, let us take from the best of the West, but we need something else. Whether you want to call it Christian love or Gandhi's nonviolence, there's this belief that man inside him can master society. Like, there's something very important about social relations and rebuilding society. Yeah, I don't know. That's what Juche, and it was interesting because the first time I was taking Juche seriously, because I remember being kind of angry when we were reading it together, because I was like, yeah, it's actually so true that why is it that Marx, like, and I'm for Marx too, like, great guy, like, really noble, all that stuff. But like, why is it that like this funny looking white guy with a beard with Marx is taken more seriously than something like Juche? Because Juche is super like made to be a joke, but it was so deep. It was so deep reading. Like, it's clear because Eddie and Jeremiah, everyone said it, but Juche, the way Kim Jong-il was writing about it was he made it a point to say, this is Jeremiah's point, that we already assume dialectical materialism. Like, that's an already assumption. But Juche, when we talk about this dialectic between individual man, like man's consciousness and his organic body, and then also man and the collective, like social transformation, he's like, that is distinctly Korean, because this theory, we have developed this theory out of the practical need of having to rebuild as a people. Yeah, no, honestly, it did remind me also of China, like Mao. But here's the thing, Juche, I think it was interesting because they were really distinctly writing it as a science, and I just haven't read enough Mao to know if China has done the same. But yeah, I feel like it's kind of similar, where even in China with this long march spirit, or in India with Gandhi saying like something distinctly Indian, nonviolence, like it's about something on the inside. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just a really beautiful interrelatedness. And okay, this is my theory, and I don't have any facts to back it, but my working hypothesis is I kind of felt like Juche was pretty Buddhist, and I'm really into this idea that like Korea, Buddhist, like that has been very integral to its philosophy. Again, I have no facts to back it up, but I find it, because it's also interesting to look at the exhibition and the connections of Buddhism, India, like how similar some of the art and culture of Korea. It reminds me of India, and yeah.
Can I just say something? There is something distinct about the philosophy, and that's, I think, the way they refer to, at least in essays that Nuri sent to me, The Philosophy of Ju Che. You see, North Korea, well, Korea, but especially the North, was completely destroyed by the US. This is one of the great crimes against humanity. But ironically, and I think this is what Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and others have said, but we were freed from exploitative social economic relationships. We were the physical plant, the physical, economic, and other institutions were obliterated. The imperialists believed that if they destroyed our physical environment, they would destroy our human environment. The irony, and I think this comes across in Kim Il-sung and others, the irony is by destroying the physical environment, they freed us from it.
Yeah.
Hence, making it possible for us to reassert the centrality of the human being. I think if I don't have it all right on this, but it was horrible. They were subjected to a crime that can never be forgotten, and it haunts the Korean people and Koreans in America. You know what I'm saying? However, and this is the difference between the North and the South, you destroyed our physical environment, but you did not destroy us. And I think the brilliance of this, and of course, believe me, it does not diminish Marx or Lenin at all. It does not. But what it showed, that in the struggle to elevate humanity, what we call democracy, humanity can find a path. This is, it's quite unbelievable. And this is what I think, we have to propagate as part of humanity's experience, which is ours as well. We have to learn from this great experiment. I guess, we talk about this. I'm a part of the planning to a certain extent. I'm not enough, but this idea of democracy as a testable hypothesis. We're making an opposite claim to the ruling class of this country. We're saying that the North Korean people have built not just a socialist economy, but even more important than that, a democracy predicated upon their own experience, guided by the philosophy of Ju Che. This is a world historic contribution. It clarifies humanity. We learn about humanity. That's what I want to say. Both testable hypothesis. Can you build democracy, which is the rule of the people, from a society that was attempted to be bombed into oblivion, and then went through an arduous march of hunger and other things in the 90s. But resilience and being sustained I think North Korea, and I guess that's, because I guess we were talking about this. How do we introduce North Korea to a American Korean population who have been told that North Korea, which is really them, is the worst thing that ever happened in Korean civilization? We're saying the opposite. But we're saying that let's take both hypotheses. Let us test them. I think there is something so rich and profound that you literally can talk about a pedagogy, a teaching curriculum based upon North Korea, the teaching of even democratic theory from the experience of North Korea, which is both universal and concrete to Korea and to Asia, by the way. This is why you can't rule out the influence of Buddhism or Confucianism.
Yeah.
It's all operating in this grand civilizational synthesis that is still in the process of being realized. Why are you laughing, Nuri?
Oh, sorry, I was murmuring.
I
was murmuring under my breath.
What were you doing?
I'm trying not to curse, but I was murmuring shit under my breath. Like, oh shit.
Can I just say one thing related to that? I've read accounts of actually what was the experience of the Korean War like for the people in the north. And when all these bombings were happening, people had to go into caves underground, naturally, right? But people would spend, sometimes not even days, but weeks, months underground. And the thing is that, for the American imperialists, the only thing that they can imagine of what's happening underground is just people cowering in fear the whole time. But actually, the way that they see it is this was almost like a womb, the womb for the birth of a new people. And I think that stuff can't be taken lightly, because it's that, and then I think the experience of the 90s with the Arduous March, both of those were hugely formative for the birth and then the continual making of a new people. And that's what imperialism is unable to anticipate, to take seriously, and to even wrap its brain around. And that's why the North Koreans have been so resilient, because one of the things that I've been thinking about is, and even this goes to conversations that you've been having, Doc, and various interviews, what was the experience of the collapse of the Soviet Union for those on the left in the United States? But also, if you're a tiny country, North Korea, and you literally see the entire world collapsing around you, and you're faced with either the option of, okay, we're going to go through the route of what was called perestroika, opening up, basically capitulating to the West, or we're going to have to find our own way. Actually, it's just, I can't even wrap my brain around what that must have been like during that period of the mid-90s, when you see the entire world collapsing around you. And also then you're suddenly hit with all these catastrophic floods, natural disasters, and all of that. But the thing that Kim Jong-il says in that period, he has this essay about basically the priority of ideological work, but he says what the socialist countries in the Eastern Bloc didn't realize is that under socialism, the motive force of history is no longer class relations, but ideology. Ideology becomes the motive force of history in socialist societies. And that because they were so focused on the class relations, they missed that actually what's propelling our societies forward, or what should propel our societies forward, is the ideological struggle. And yeah, I think it's that, because the North Koreans had already been working on that stuff for the past couple decades, I think that was what gave them the confidence to be able to be okay, the whole world has basically gone into pieces. We don't know what's going to happen. We're in for a very rough period, similar to Cuba, but Like we are confident in the ability of our people to make it through. And because we also have a kind of scientific approach to how we can do this, which is like incorporating a Marxism, like the principles of socialism, but more we have a theory about human beings and what human beings are capable of. And that this is going to be our weapon in terms of how we're going to be able to make it through this extraordinary period of the collapse of the world, like the world communist movement, like the Soviet Union and all that stuff. Yeah, it's just really, really fascinating, I think. And it's relevant for, what our hypothesis is of what will be the conditions for the birth of a new people. Like it won't be like people having to go underground because we're being bombed. Hopefully. Like that's like our fingers are crossed that doesn't happen. But like that there are certain just experiences in world history that are so instrumental in shaping new sensibilities, like new values, like a new way of relating as human beings to one another, like a new sense of what like the people feel they're capable of. Because yeah, like Kim Jong-il is like, what we mean by giving priority to ideological work is we need to impress on the people of our country that each person feels that what they do in terms of their work, how they relate to each other, what they feel is their responsibility as individuals, like on the backs of North Korean people rests the future of humanity. We need to impress that on the people of our country, that what they're doing has consequences for all of humanity, even though we're a small country. And I think that is like, if the North Koreans can do that, like, I just feel like that we have to have the same optimism and belief and seek to instill that same sense of like importance and responsibility also for the American people, to realize that what happens in America has so much consequence for the rest of the world, and that we can shape the future of humanity too if we believe that we're capable of doing that. But yeah.
I just want to say one small other thing. It's like saying that we could lose everything, but as long as we have the people, we have the future. And it's true. It's true. And like you said, Jerry, we might not have to bury and burrow under the ground, but our people are being buried by ideas and propaganda that tries to take their souls, their spirit, their minds from them. And this might be even more difficult. The destruction of humanity, literally from the day that a child is born. You've already discounted him or her. You've discounted their parents. You've diminished them. So, in a sense, we are buried under propaganda and lies and distortions, etc. But, and here's where I agree with Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and the Korean people. It is the people that can resolve the great problems of our time. Not elites, not universities, not hedge funds or Wall Street or Silicon Valley people, but it is the people. And I think if you want to test that hypothesis, look at North Korea. Probably the most extraordinary society on the planet. They did not have, and I put quotes around this, the luxury that China had, because the period of this rapid economic growth was in a period of rapprochement with the United States. There's never been a rapprochement between the United States and North Korea. Came close to it with Trump. But then Bolton and the ruling military elites undermined that. He couldn't do it. But that did not alter the trajectory. I guess the last thing I said, this Juche philosophy ties elites or leaders of society in new ways to the people. It connects them. It infuses in those who, let's say, have high educations and high positions, a predisposition to love the peasant who has none of that. A social, I guess you could call it some way a social contract, but it's way more than that. Because at the end of the day, it is the foundation of a way of governing the state of the whole people. In other words, I'll end on this. Could it be that North Korea is closer to a communist society than any other society in the world? Yeah, that's all I want to say.
Okay, I could try to read some comments, but there's been a lot. Yeah.
But we should listen to them because we're obviously not going to get to Black Reconstruction today.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
We did get the Black Reconstruction.
Can I actually read a paragraph from the piece that reflects what, Doc, you were saying just now? So it says, revolutionary practice is a struggle to realize independence for the popular masses, and it is the masses who carry out the struggle. Therefore, it is important in the study of philosophy to reflect the demands and aspirations of the popular masses correctly, evolve the theory by generalizing their experiences of struggle, and make it the theory of the popular masses themselves. In the exploitative society, the reactionary ruling class makes use of philosophy for defending and rationalizing their reactionary ruling system, trying to make it the monopoly of the philosophers who act as spokesmen in their interests. We consider the popular masses to be ignorant people who have nothing to do with philosophy. But I read that just to support Doc, what you were saying earlier, which is that it grounds essentially the people of the North Korean government in the masses themselves, in what their relationship is. And actually, the only way I was able to understand this is really by Du Bois, because in Black Reconstruction, Du Bois talks about how, like, there's this idea that the masses of men are ignorant, but actually, like, what does it say when the masses of men are actually not ignorant and are capable of governing, are capable of theorizing and having a philosophy? But yeah.
What chapter was that from?
For the Du Bois one?
Wait, what did you just read from?
Yeah, that was from Kendall, I think, the philosophy.
Oh, okay.
They're so in sync with each other that you can't tell them apart.
Right. Instruction. I was like, oh, what chapter did Du Bois write that in?
Yeah. Well, I was also thinking so much of Russia and America. I mean, famous for us because we've looked at it a lot. But when he talks about it must be Marxian, and I mean, he's talking about the Asiatic, the emergence of communism in Africa and Asia. And he says it must be Marxian in its division of income according to need, but it must be distinctly Asiatic in its use of the vertical clan division of family and tie, instead of reaction towards a new bourgeoisie. Sometimes it would take a new way of thinking on Asiatic lines to work this out. but there would be a chance that out of India, out of Buddhism and Shintoism, out of the age-old virtues of Japan and China itself, to provide for this different kind of communism, a thing which so far all attempts at a socialistic state in Europe have failed to produce. That is a communism with Asiatic stress on character, on goodness, on spirit, through family loyalty and affection might ward off Thermidor, might stop the tendency of the Western socialistic state to freeze into bureaucracy. It might be through the philosophy of Gandhi and Tagore, of Japan and China, really create a vast democracy into which the ruling dictatorship of the proletariat would fuse and deliquesce, and thus, instead of socialism, even become a stark negation of the freedom of thought and a tyranny of action and propaganda of science and art. It would expand to a great democracy of the spirit, which is pretty much exactly what we've the whole, and yeah, from Russia and
Can you send that?
I think chapter. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I got the searchable copy from you, Nuri, but it's chapter 4 of Russia and America. I'll send it on WhatsApp.
I don't probably have to say this, but like the whole thing about philosophy is like, because what you also said, Doc, like Juche, sorry, allows to connect to the peasantry, like allows to connect to the essence of the people of the country, of civilization. And I'm like, well, what's up with Europe? And why?
It's a different, it's so important. Maybe we can't get to that now, but it is so valuable. And that's why Europe is not the United States, precisely for the reasons that Du Bois illuminates, that it is Africa in America, that in many ways makes America not a European country. Makes it different. Canada is more a European country than the United States is. You know, that's just
dang.
So, let's hear some of the commentary if y'all don't mind. I'm so interested.
There's a lot of people talking. One person was asking, is the free school trying to undertake the task of developing a uniquely American way towards socialism or something like that? And someone, DJ Elf, was also saying he had a theory about the naming process of Korean people, which I think is a general hypothesis about the role of Confucianism in Korean culture, which I guess can be debated. And then a few people were saying that they're going to be at the march, like next weekend's march rally in DC. And yeah, just to clarify, we've also been planning this Korea event for a long time. We're not doing it to, this wasn't intended to be like anything replacing the march. But that being said, if people are in town or free either the Friday evening next week or Saturday all throughout the day, we'd love to see people there in person at the Asian Arts Initiative in Philadelphia and Chinatown. You can check out our social media to see all the details of the event, or just visit koreapeace.org just to see the details. And also, we have a GoFundMe fundraiser, which is primarily raising funds for renting the venue at Asian Arts Initiative, and also providing food and refreshments for attendees. And lastly, to fund the printing of materials for this exhibit that we've been talking about, which we're all really excited about. So we're close to the goal, but it would be really great if people, if they haven't already, we'd really appreciate donations on the GoFundMe, which is also linked in the koreapeace.org website. But yeah, just some logistical details. Oh, go ahead.
Wait, there was one comment that I just really liked. So I think I mentioned it before, but Christopher Romero had said Du Bois, King, Kim Il-sung, No matter where they come from, these humans are examples as to how our capacity as humans are progressing with time. And Stan Wood also said that he's excited about the opportunity to learn about Korea. He says, it will increase my understanding of the world and the challenge of making it better. So I feel like that's kind of the note that I feel like would be good to sort of conclude on. Yeah.
Well, with Nuri's remarks, it's 4 p.m. And thank you everyone for joining us in the comments section on both Facebook and YouTube. We're excited for you to join us next week for our Korea event. And so we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.